And I will open this special meeting of the City Council at 1 o'clock Tuesday, August the 15th. Item number 1 is to interview finalists to provide professional services in support of the city's development of a new comprehensive plan. And we welcome you here to make your presentation today, all of you. And I know it's been discussed with you, but the format that we have been given that we would like to follow is a 1-hour scenario in which you will give a 20-minute presentation. And Mr. McDaniel will flag you when that 20 minutes is up, and so we can get all the questions and answers in that we need to. Then we will begin Q&A. Then at the end you'll have 5 minutes for closing remarks. So if that suits you and everything is understood, we will, unless Mr. McDaniel or someone else has something to say, we will look forward for your 20-minute presentation.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much for having us here. We certainly appreciate your time this afternoon for allowing us to be here. My name is Wendy Chabet. I'm with Freese Nichols. I think probably most of you have heard of Freese Nichols. We have been in business 123 years. We started as an architecture or engineering firm in Texas, and we have grown and expanded that out of state. But the one mission that has always been consistent with Freese Nichols is to be focused on our customers and client service. That's the one thing that we feel like we can do the best, and that's a very important philosophy for us. You see up here on the screen our urban planning and design group. Again, many people think of us as engineers, but we actually have a 23-person urban planning and design group. And comprehensive plans are the main thing that we do. That is our major wheelhouse of our business within our planning group, and so we're very proud to have a very diverse group that works on different components of that plan. We are also very proud to bring forth award-winning plans. You'll see the last 6 years up here on the screen, but we're really proud to be able to recognize our cities when we can bring good plans to them. This is the team. I mentioned I'm Wendy Chabet. I head our urban planning and design group. I've been at Freese Nichols 13 years now, and I'll be as the principal in charge on the project, and also just the overall project director. The one thing that I do a lot of is our public involvement, so that'd be a key role that I'll play a part of. Outside of my Freese Nichols job, I'm on the board of the American Planning Association on the national board, so I go around the U.S. and get a chance to speak and learn best practices and be able to bring that back to the city. So really proud of that. I want to have our rest of our team introduce themselves real quick.
My name is Shad Como. I've been with Freese Nichols for about 10 years now. I'm based out of the Houston office, lead that region, and also do some work in the Central Texas area as well. Outside of Freese Nichols, I think I'm recently appointed to Director-elect of the Houston section.
Dan
Sefco. I have had a long relationship with Freese Nichols, and also as my own firm. I've been in this business 45 years. And I will be contributing history and other related knowledge and quality control and a lot of other information regarding the different aspects of the whole project.
My name is Erica Craycraft-Bartlett. I've been with Freese Nichols just over 9 years. I split my time. I work partially on comprehensive plans and then also on development codes. I'm based out of the Dallas office, but I do a lot of work in the central region, most recently for Utah, Cedar Park, and Helotes. I also do some work outside of Texas, right now in the New Orleans area, and then also the Oklahoma City area.
And I'm Michael Latham. I'm with Catalyst Commercial. Catalyst is based out of North Central Texas, out of Dallas. We're an economic development firm. We provide economic impact studies, market analysis, and specifically with comprehensive plans, we typically link land use to the market analysis. The principal of the firm, Jason Claunch, he was previously with Billings, where he led the land acquisition for Target. We work really all over the place nationally, throughout the state. We've done quite a bit of work in the greater Austin area, including Georgetown, Bernie, Kyle. In Kyle, we focused more on retail analysis and recruitment. Recruited over 45 retailers for the city of Kyle. And in Bernie, we recently conducted a hotel and convention center analysis, and they've actually asked us to continue that relationship and provide scope for a retail analysis and a retail recruitment services.
Thank you.
And
We also MFA.
Yeah.
We also have MFA on the team. They work with Catalyst.
yes, so Dan Martin, he's an excellent asset on the team. He is nationally known and recognized, and he focuses on market analysis, but he specializes in entertainment and hospitality venues. So he works on sporting venues, casinos, things of that nature throughout the nation.
And lastly, we are real excited to have Peter Lewis Architects on our team. I think many of you probably know him. In fact, he told me to tell y'all he's on a much-needed vacation right now, but based out of Kerrville, so he'll provide some of that local expertise on projects, as well as helping in some of our public involvement and charrettes and renderings on that component. So I'm going to turn it over to your project manager.
So one part that makes a project successful is if it has great project management. One of the things at Freese Nichols is our project managers go through a rigorous training. At the end of that training, we're certified, and we also have continual education, which we've all kind of been through that program. So one of the things that we want to do at the beginning of the project is to have that client kickoff meeting with you all to develop the communication plan, the project plan, determine who the point of contacts are going to be so that we can make sure that we have a smooth process. Also making sure that we have regular interaction with you all as well. We do that through our one-page reports, which is a status report that we do on a monthly basis in order to make sure that everyone is on track as well. And one thing I'll mention about being responsive, I'm a very responsive person. Now my wife might disagree because I think responsiveness to her is doing it before she acts. But I'm a very responsive person, and so make sure that we'll get back to you within a day to make sure that everything is running smoothly. Here, beginning with the end in mind, when we begin with the end in mind, it's not necessarily saying that we already have the solutions for the project, because we know that we have to work with the citizens and the steering committees to make sure that we develop the right things, to develop the appropriate recommendations at the end. But we also know that there is an end, and so we want to make sure that we guide you through that process. That process begins with our data gathering, where we learn as much as possible about the community, going through the various analysis, which leads to the analysis and scenario phases that we'll work with you all on. And then finally, the implementation, which is very important, because one of the things that we as planners do not like to see is a plan that sits on a shelf. And so we want to make sure that we provide you with the appropriate implementation tools in order to make sure that your projects and your recommendations are fulfilled and the vision of the community agreed on is fulfilled. And understanding that every project is different and every city is different, just from what we've gathered and learned about your community, we've outlined some things that we think are outcomes for success. The first is building consensus. At the end of the day, we want to make sure, and we know and understand that 100% of the population is not going to agree on everything, but we want to make sure that the majority agrees on the vision that's been established throughout the process. And so we do a great job at building consensus through our public engagement, as well as the committees that we work with in the city leadership. Also understanding that you have a unique identity. Those people that were born and raised here in Kerrville, they have identified with this community. Those long-term residents have identified with this community. Even people outside of the community know Kerrville and have a certain perception about it. And so we want to make sure that that is maintained even as we plan out into the 20 to 30 year time frame. Planning for appropriate growth. When you look at the trends across the state, we understand, at least for the next 50 years, that the population is going to continue to grow throughout Texas. So how do we want to accommodate that growth? We want to make sure that that growth is appropriate for Kerrville. And finally, the ease of implementation. Implementation, making sure that the ideas, the vision are carried out through the implementation plan, making sure that they are aligned with your capital improvement plan and your capital improvement projects as well. So we just want to share briefly some success stories on some previous plans that we've worked on, and also kind of show maybe some similarities with Kerrville. City of Duncanville, which is just south of Dallas, is a project that I recently led. They're about 11 square miles, dealing with a lot of redevelopment. Also making sure that they have their own identity, being amongst a lot of the southern suburbs in Dallas, south of Dallas. So one of the things that we did, and we worked with Catalyst on this, is to develop some unique areas or some opportunity areas throughout the city, downtown being one of those areas, and giving each of those areas a unique identity, and showing them and developing some strategies for them to redevelop over time. It's been a great process to go through. Public was very engaged, and this was one project where we were able to build consensus at the end of the process in order to implement the vision.
Wanted to let y'all know a little bit about some of the other projects that our team's been involved with. We are in the process of developing a comprehensive plan for the city of Lubbock. One of the things that's notable about that is the first time that they've developed a new comprehensive plan since 1985, and they've had a lot of growth with the university, et cetera. It also has a large steering committee, and their steering committee is 40 people. So they have appointed, they want a robust input from the CPAC committee, Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee. So that is a project that's underway. We have gone through extensive public input, and we found that the public really is interested. We've had a greater number on surveys that we've even expected. There's other communities that we've been involved with that have significant downtown areas, such as yours, that we've worked on and want to make sure that these areas stay vibrant. We just recently, last year, finished the Granbury Comprehensive Plan. We've done most of the planning work in Fredericksburg, all of their major planning efforts. To date, we're working on today the Hill Country Master Plan for Texas Tech University there, and working with them on that project. But over the years, we've had a relationship there and had a lot of great results from their planning efforts.
We also developed the 2010 comprehensive plan for Burleson, and since then they've brought us back in to look at the 2010 plan, get some additional public input, and focus on some key issues that are affecting the city. And now we're updating the plan to integrate that input and also completely rewriting their zoning ordinance and redoing the zoning map to focus on implementation of the plan. In that, we're really focusing on the corridors and some other key character areas like the downtown and some urban design nodes throughout the city that we'll use form-based code to address.
Longview is another plan that we did their comprehensive plan. It was a very large committee as well, 40-something person committee, similar to what you all are putting in place. And so breaking that up into subcommittees and again, really getting the community, all the stakeholders, the businesses, and their buy-in was very, very important to them. So it had a very robust public involvement plan. Following that, their two number one priorities of the comp plan was a small area plan for their I-30 corridor and then also, or I-20 corridor, and then also the downtown plan. So we just finished both of those and they're really excited. They're having us come back and do a TIF for them. And then Erica is leading, updating their entire UDC. Louisville is another one. Again, very robust public involvement. You're starting to see a trend here. A lot of different people, a lot of committees. Louisville was coming on the a new city manager had just come in, and they had not done a planning process in quite some time. And so doing, again, a very robust public involvement, but then also really getting all the different departments involved and making sure that across the city staff that they were all on the same page. A huge success out of this. Their entire CIP is built off of the comprehensive plan and what they call their big moves. And so it was a really good focused effort. And then I got to work a little bit with Mark back in the day on Tyler 21. We did the part on the infrastructure and transportation, and some of my colleagues helped out a little bit with the public involvement on that. And then we're able to do a few of their small area plans that came out of that plan. So the reason we talk so much about the public involvement is because I do think it is a critical piece. We think that we are very good at leading that, and I know that that's sometimes a challenge, but we really do love working with different people. We like to make our work very innovative and fun and collaborative and something that's a memorable experience for your community. It ought to be something that's fun, that people remember, and that they want to come back and be a part of. Certainly working with the steering committee is obviously something we're accustomed to. We like to build champions as a part of that plan. We want to make it engaging. We want to make it, we'll have a website. We'll have an online survey so that people can easily go to give us information without even be a part, and then also be able to hear that information throughout. We love to piggyback on existing events that you have. So be it the folk festival or chalk festival, or there's some of those, so many great things that you all do that sound very interesting. And so as we can engage with those things that you're already doing and do something at those booths, we think a really good way to get people involved in the civic aspect that wouldn't normally maybe come to a public meeting. And certainly the most important part of all of that is just being able to build consensus. I have no doubt whatsoever that our staff has the talent. We've done this. We understand all the different pieces and parts of what goes into a comprehensive plan. But sometimes, again, the engagement process is what really helps make that a success and carry it on going forward. Our philosophy is this: the plan doesn't define the community defines the plan. And that is incredibly important to us because it ought to reflect you and what is important to your city. So just in closing, I think we're your choice for a couple of different reasons. Number one, we would absolutely love to be a part of this and work on this. There is a very deep bench of experience and expertise on this, not only in the planning realm, but certainly all of the other components of parks and transportation and infrastructure and water and economic development, all those components that make that up. We've got a national level expertise, but really, again, focused at that small regional level, and Central Texas is certainly one of the areas that we are focused in. I mentioned the public involvement. We've got a very, very highly experienced, committed team as a part of this, and we have spent our life serving municipalities. We don't do developer work. This is what we do. We work for cities, and that's really our main crux of our business. So we would be very happy to answer any questions that you have, and I certainly appreciate your time today.
Okay, thank you very much, Wendy. And so what we'll do now is begin the portion where we have three predetermined questions, basically. And so in keeping with the time constraints here, we'll just go around the table and you can answer, but keep in mind there'll be three, and we'll have until about 5 till for you to give your wrap-up statements, and then staff may have some questions for you as well. So you may have answered part of this, but my particular question written here is, what part of your team's experience, and again I think you've answered part of this, but what part of your team's experience with a comprehensive planning effort, if any, would you say goes well beyond land use and transportation?
I think there's a couple of components. I mean, besides the land use and transportation, I mean, certainly some of the other components of a comprehensive plan traditionally would be your parks, and making sure that your parks and trails are integrated the infrastructure, especially if we're looking at land use in a growth scenario and we're looking at future growth and what is the infrastructure needs that need to go along with that, and how does that pay for itself, what's the fiscal analysis and viability of that, the economic development piece, and most recently, and I mentioned the APA role that I play. A couple of things that we're doing a lot of now are, number one, looking at resiliency planning. How do you bounce back, whether that be natural disasters, whether that be economic disasters? What are those things that, and you're looking at a 30-year plan, so there's a lot to that, and should we have any kind of major catastrophes, flooding, et cetera, how do we bounce back from that, and how are you as a city organizing that? Also, healthy communities, big deal right now in terms of, that some of that goes along with your parks and trails, but others is just making sure that there are adequate services to all different components of your city, and making sure that healthy communities is a big part of that. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is engaging the citizens. I mean, that's not related necessarily to land use, but they use the land, and so we want to make sure that we have a lot of experience engaging them in a variety of ways.
And you'll have that in a follow-up, I'm sure. Thank
Okay.
you. Councilman Bova?
Yes. City of any size has differing viewpoints on both sides of pro-growth versus non-growth argument. Describe an instance where you have been faced, or where you have faced a question squarely.
What city have we not done that on? Granbury is one. We just finished that. That was a good example of where there's, it is growing. Anything outside of the Metroplex, and just in general, what I've told, what we study a lot on demographics. Texas in general is growing, and so I live in Colleyville, Texas. If y'all know anything about Colleyville, very anti-growth. I mean, and we actually just did some amendments on their comp plan because they were adamant they did not want the growth. But going through a real robust, again, getting citizens to understand this is the impact it's going to have on you if you don't grow. From long term, I mean, those taxes that you're getting from, so many things, you're going to have to look at what continues to sustain that. But then also the flip side of that, it's a cultural thing. And if it is something about really keeping that unique community, and that is truly important, as it was with Colleyville, there was a resounding feedback that is what we want. And so that's what we developed for them. So we see both sides. I think it's really an education piece to make that important.
Okay. Councilman Baroudi?
Okay, so this is obviously a 20, 30-year plan. In what ways will you all be helping us to make sure this is a plan that's relevant for 20, 30 years as opposed to something that just gets done and put on a shelf?
I think one part of that is just defining the principles and the values that those withstand the years. What are those important components to you? Usually our implementation plan is broken up into short-term, mid-term, and long-term. And so we'll look at those that are in the short-term, say 5-year horizon, the 10 to 15-year horizon, and then that further out horizon.
And I think also, and the reason why we typically include catalysts or economic development consultants on our team is because you really have to look at the market and what the market suggests. And a lot of times we have that challenge where we work with communities, they desire certain things, but that's really not the market reality. And so we look at the economic development and that market piece of it so that we can create a real plan that is achievable at the end of the day.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Summerlin.
How would you propose to assist us in ensuring that we retain what makes Kerrville unique, yet make the most of the growth that will come and keep us thriving?
Again, I think part of that goes to defining those values up front. And that's a key thread. And so in some cases, you're defining principles and you're weighting the importance of that. And if that's a really critical thing for you, then we ought to be thinking through all of the following decisions that get made through that lens of this is one of the most important principles that we have within our city, and looking at everything through that lens. And so that's part of what we'll be defining early on, and why I think that public involvement is so important to understand that, because that's something we can't determine for you. We got to have the citizens help us determine that.
Mr. Ferguson?
Yeah. Have you identified or made a reasonable assumption for an infrastructure or resource challenge that we are facing that may be particularly concerning? And kind of the second half of that question is, what will be your first steps in working on this issue?
Want to answer that, or you want me to go ahead?
Mr. McDaniel, did you give each candidate a heads up on this question?
Nope.
Well, that was ugly. No.
Infrastructure drives a lot. It doesn't drive everything, but understanding our capacity and that capacity for efficient growth. And efficient growth is based on how we can expand the existing system most efficiently. We've worked in most areas of Texas, and we have conservative-based politics and issues, pro-growth, no growth, but it's a balance. One of the things that strikes that balance is the assessment of our capacity of our infrastructure system. If you start with that, then the education process, as Wendy just said, occurs, and we begin to understand how we can afford to grow, how much can we grow based on our existing infrastructure system. Then, once we understand that, it crystallizes how you can expend future expenditures on expanding your infrastructure system. So we start with what we got. How can we expand that system most efficiently? That determines how much we grow short term. But as was noted, it's a 30-year plan. So that also allows us to begin to make choices and decisions about how to take the next leap beyond what the capacity is of our current system, and then how do we prepare ourselves for 30 years. So that's the basis of making sure we got a handle of it. We have history here, and one thing we do bring to the table is we do understand where a lot of your existing infrastructure capacity is today.
Next would be me, but before I get into that one, very quickly, because I don't want to get off schedule, do you vet that? Do you believe in vetting that early in the process to the public?
Well,
or to the steering committee, at least?
Yes, ma'am. You know, the old Yogi Berra's statement, Yogi Berra was a baseball player, and he said, if you don't know where you're going, you might end up someplace else. So we have to understand where Kerrville's been from a land use standpoint and an infrastructure standpoint. Then the once we understand that, you'd be surprised, the members of these steering committees, how they think they know about Kerrville. Maybe we know about the history and some of the local history, but when you start educating them about these broader issues, it's amazing what people don't know. And what we always do is develop that background knowledge first, so we understand where we are on infrastructure and land use and those kinds of issues first. Once we get that understanding, your CPAC committee, your steering committee, will be better poised to make the choices about how we grow or not grow. So.
That makes sense. Okay, so describe an experience that your team has had involving two seemingly opposing sides of a local issue, and how were you able to facilitate an acceptable middle ground? And nobody wants the mic.
We're all thinking, we probably all have some, because we've all led different types of projects. You know, we recently did, I mentioned Granbury earlier just because, again, it had different types of, philosophy. Longview to that extent. That's one I mentioned earlier. It was a very north-south kind of situation where you had two very opposing kind of philosophies on where money should be spent. Very vocal, it needs to go to the south, but yet the real growth in that community is going to the north, and that's where the market wants to go, and that's where it's obvious. And so walking them through a process, and again, a lot of education and a lot of thinking through to get that community, even so much as a council member that represented the north end, saying, we have got to put money in our south side. It's important for us, and that's why we just turned around into the small area plan, is because not everybody was on the same page, but we had to kind of make the case of a rising tide floats all boats. And so if we want to be good as a community, we got to figure out where's our weakest link and how do we bring that up. So there was a lot of concentrated efforts on bringing that south side up, and that was not how that plan started at day one. It was not that way, but we were able to get it around that way. You want to add anything?
Yeah, real quick one. I'm a native of Port Arthur, Texas, home of Janis Joplin and ex-Cowboys coach Jimmy Johnson.
And Mary Ellen Summers.
But we developed their downtown revitalization plan probably about almost 2 years ago. And if you know a little bit about Port Arthur, a lot of refineries, but a lot of the growth was occurring north. But the downtown is pretty much a ghost town. So when we started working with the plan, it was some people saying, well, yes, let's revive the downtown area, but then some people say, well, it's already dead, let's just leave it alone. So we had to come to a consensus to show them the value in rebuilding their downtown. If they did not rebuild their downtown or invest in it, then essentially that'll start spreading to the north area as well. So at the end of the day, once we built the consensus, we had some intense public engagement and really worked with the community in developing that vision of downtown. Once they saw the vision, then we were able to get people on board.
Okay, very good. Mr. Bolcom?
The Guadalupe River is one of our greatest assets. Describe how you might address it in a comprehensive plan.
Good one.
I mean,
Yeah,
I'll start. The south side of the river looked like you've done a lot with it, but we were looking today. I think it's the north side. The side closest to downtown is way underutilized, and you can go a whole bunch more on that. You can see where the people are using the trails where there is no trails, and so you can see the desires there. So there's a really great opportunity to expand on that. But if the more you can have access, which is not always easy, to these facilities, the more that it helps everything around it. And so having some key access points there would be a challenge for us, but it would be something that would be really great for downtown and other areas.
One thing I'll add to that, I sit next to the guy who's been working on Lowry Trail, and so I see a lot of the Kerrville plans. He's worked on some of the River Park Trail, and so I see a lot of your stuff. I was a project manager in Fort Worth on the Trinity River Vision, and I know that that's completely out of scale for Kerrville, but the Trinity River was one we had completely turned our back to, and so it's been something for 20 years. I started out 20 years ago working on that, trying to reorient, reprogram, rethink how, because I believe rivers are a huge asset. It's a great asset for you, and so being able to take advantage of that and the trails and using that as your spine and continuing the work that you've already, started on that and continuing the great parks that you have is a real asset.
Mr. Rudy?
Okay, so there are going to be many theories regarding the best approach to thoroughfare and land use planning, but keeping in mind that Kerrville is one of those split personality towns where we have a heavy retirement community and then a growing not retirement. Describe the approaches that you believe would best fit for Kerrville and getting to that best land use.
Well, let me answer one component of that, because I think what I'm hearing and detecting in some of the questions is, yes, there's varying opinions, you know, from a public facilitation standpoint. We do a lot of polling, because, you know, it's interesting. You get a room full of people, and there may be a couple of people that are adamantly against something, but then you take the poll of the greater audience, and you realize not everybody thinks that same way. So a part of that is just an art of facilitation and being able to get to the bottom line. I think there's probably a second piece to what you're saying.
Transportation planning is changing. What we're finding is as you engage in technical analysis of roadways, is there's certain things like expanded interchanges and not so much expanding the roadways, which is a tremendous impact to existing businesses and homes. That's different when you're on your fringe, and so you balance your changes within your city. Like many cities in Texas, all the roads led to here. And that worked when Kerrville was small, as many Texas cities, but as you grow, it's less and less efficient. So the balance is trying to figure out how to adjust your existing urban core network, which doesn't allow itself to widening very well because of the political ramifications and the business ramifications. So the strategy is to work on those operational improvements that most of the residents see, and then make sure that as you expand, you take care of that expansion. What happened in Weatherford is that if you've been to Weatherford, all roads led to downtown, right there at the courthouse. And what happened was Weatherford refused to make improvements in the core area. And so all the traffic was seeking to go through the neighborhoods. And then all of a sudden, the city saw a huge increase in non-residential zoning change requests on all the residential streets because the traffic had increased. So what it was doing, it was ruining their precious neighborhoods. And so what we've got to do is make sure our basic network is doing the job. Otherwise, it will start affecting your neighborhoods. So that's the big picture.
So how do you feel about traffic roundabouts? Just kidding.
We can go into that, so we can arm wrestle about that.
Okay. Where are we, Mr.?
It's my turn.
Miss Summerlin.
Our topography presents both opportunities and challenges. Describe some of both as you see them. We might be talking about the hills,
Right.
lift stations, water
Right.
towers.
Right. Again, there's a couple of us that can answer these.
Well, let me start.
Okay.
You can finish. You do have some of those characteristics that will never change.
That's right.
Yeah.
They'll never change. And so what they're going to do is, as the question was earlier in our presentation here, is that's going to affect the expansion of our water and sewer system, mainly the sewer system. And so those are limiting factors that we've got to gauge so that we can decide how much of the topography we want to tackle. We can go out a long way. All it costs is money. But the idea here is to match our best wisdom on our infrastructure capacity with reasonable expansion for 30 years. So what's that match? That's the essence of the work. Yes, the topography will affect those choices, but that is what we've got to do. And I think if we can hit that point, 30 years from now, your citizens are going to appreciate that foresight of trying to match that. Infrastructure is just so expensive, as we all know. And so we just have to make those choices wisely.
We've done similar assessments for Burleson and Lago Vista, where we overlaid the topography, where you look at the slopes greater than 25%, lay on the existing and planned infrastructure, and use that to identify the proposed growth areas in the city.
Okay. Mr. Ferguson?
Your team appears to cover the basis of what would be included in the plan. Describe your approach to collaborating with one another and in coordinating planning efforts with city staff.
I'll start that. You can talk about staff. We work as a extremely collaborative team. All of us, I mean, our entire group, we mix and mingle a lot of our different team. I'm most proud of that as a group manager because I feel like we've got incredible talent, and so it doesn't matter if someone is in Austin or Houston or Dallas or where they are. We are very collaborative. We Skype a lot. So from an internal perspective, we really bring in the best of talent. I think that's one of the good things, again, just about Freese Nichols in general, is our groups are very collaborative. So if there is a particular issue from a land use perspective, but we really need to understand what does the stormwater say about that, we can pull them in. I'd say that same thing with staff. I mean, we really want to work with all the departments. I mentioned Louisville as one of the projects. It's one of my favorite projects just because everybody in that city was involved. I mean, fire, police, everybody. We had the city everybody, because all those people have knowledge of what's important to the city. They know what you do on a daily basis and what do you get calls for. And so I think the more collaborative we can be with staff, along with the citizens and internally, to me that makes for a real successful project.
Yeah, we typically will have like we call it a staff workshop or staff charrette, where all the department heads or whomever department heads would like to invite come to the table, and we work through various issues and various understandings, so that way we can get the staff on board and collaborate, as well as what Wendy says, internally is no issue. Like Freese Nichols it really is a family. You hear she's been there 13 years, 10 years, many of years, so we work together very well, so working collaboratively internally is not an issue at all.
Okay.
And just, this is the team. We're not going to do a shell game on you here. This is the team that is going to work on the project. So we're here. These are the ones you'll see. We've always thought we were an extension of staff, and so this is the group.
Okay, we'll take about 2 minutes for each of these last questions, and then we won't have time for staff unless we overextend. So quickly, how would you propose to maximize citizen and stakeholder participation if you were selected, and how many projects do you engage in simultaneously?
Usually our staff is probably anywhere around 6 projects each on average. Again, we always have those points where we're working on something and it's being reviewed by a client while we're working on meetings. Again, that's on average. Some of the really big projects someone on, we may spread that around. In terms of working with stakeholders, we like to set aside, and the SHAT is awesome at this, a very detailed schedule, set meetings at the very, very beginning so that they know exactly what to expect. If for whatever reason we get stuck on a particular thing, we may have some subgroups that come out of that committee where we let them focus on a particular topic and then bring that back to the committee. But that's usually how we work with them.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Vogel?
This planning effort will extend 2 miles beyond the city's current city limits. How would you propose that we engage Kerr County stakeholders in the process?
I think we engage them. We bring them in. Yeah, we typically work with cities that have the ETJ, and some of those, they think they're not a part of the city, but they are affected by the plans. And so we want to make sure that we bring them in. And so I mentioned earlier about in the project management tools, we'll develop a communications plan. And so that's when we'll work with you all and staff to be able to identify those various groups, as you mentioned, that need to be engaged, and then we'll develop a method of engaging them. One thing that I hadn't had an opportunity to do, that I would love to do, is I always offer these tea times. And it's typically focused towards those smaller groups that may be on the outside, where we can meet in their home and talk about the issues and the concerns and things like that. So we would love to reach out in a variety of methods to be able to engage them in the process.
I just wanted to, one of the real keys is the school districts usually their boundaries are greater than the city limits. And having the school districts involved is one of the key ways that we include input outside of the city limits. I got to admit, I don't know how many on your steering committee that you've appointed are in the ETJ, but that would be another one, to be able to link to those. And we have found that there are a lot of business leaders that live in the ETJ. The citizens out there don't get to vote, and so we may be less concerned about them, but they're important. But we found that there are a lot of business leaders that live in the ETJ that provide an important link too. So those are the two of the biggest.
Okay. Mr. Broody.
Okay, so I'm kind of going off the reservation a little bit. If you've been involved in staff or council-driven planning in Kerrville, as Freese Nichols has in the past, how will you ensure that you're able to keep an open mind to the input given by the general public in this current planning process?
What's different, I think it's different kinds of input. The input that you get from engineering type decisions is much different than the type of input that we'll be getting, because we're not going to be asking technicians about their community. But a technical choice or a technical decision is one thing. We're going to be asking about a lot different questions and a lot broader questions. So we're going to be listening to a different group, different points of view. Your CPAC, your committee that you've already connected. So that's the big difference.
I think that's what I was going to say, was the committee is real important. I'm glad y'all did that, because I think that they're, again, a good test of, and you know, when we see that something's going off chart, then I think there's a technical expertise that has got to come in and rein things back in. I think that is important to be able to make sound decisions, but I also think the committee, educating them to help us drive that and keep us on point is an important as well.
Okay. Ms. Summerlin?
What experience does your team have with economic development, and what strategies do you see as relevant to Kerrville?
All right, I'm dying to talk here. I'm an economist, so generally eyes just glaze over, so I just kind of smile and keep my mouth shut. So really, I mean, kind of to your question, really to a lot of these questions, the way I see the world, everything's economics, whether you're talking about growth versus no growth, whether you're talking about infrastructure, 30-year plan. So really, from an economic development perspective, the first thing we want to do is ensure that the plan is grounded in market realities, right? So we're going to go in and we're going to do a market analysis first thing. That way we can provide that information to the community stakeholders to ensure that these meetings that we have with the community, they're informed of these market-based realities. Then on the, as the planning goes through, again, a lot of these things can become little heated at times, right? Different people want different things. So really from an economic development perspective, what we want to do is just provide information. So once we have the different perspectives out there, then what we can do is essentially create a customizable scenario-based plan. So if you have, so for instance, we worked in a community in Saxe, which is a small bedroom community northeast of Dallas. Again, many of the people there felt that they needed some more higher density commercial developments, and they also wanted to focus on their downtowns. They didn't really have a downtown. But a lot of people just wanted to keep it a small bedroom residential community. So essentially what we did was create this customizable tool that we provided to the city, and it enabled them to go through and we essentially sat down and looked at what's your existing land use. And if you do absolutely nothing based on infrastructure costs in the future, existing revenue streams, where are you going to be from a fiscal sustainability perspective 30 years down the road? And then we just created that tool to where you could look at these various land uses, and it's like, okay, well, along the highways, if we change a little bit of this residential to maybe some townhomes or various types of commercial, well, then what's going to be the impact? So it essentially enabled the community, the stakeholders to just basically fill in the blanks, and then it would spit out these 30-year projections in terms of revenues, costs, and overall fiscal impact.
So that's your definition of a market analysis in 5 terms, or?
So slightly different, right? So the market analysis to me, the market analysis is more on the front end. It's looking at things like demographics, psychographics, population growth, income growth, the ability to retain and attract various businesses. So based on that market, what's going to be the need for housing? What's going to be the need for various types of commercial? What do you currently have? What are you attracting from the greater area? What do you not have where you're losing those dollars and they're going to other communities? That's the market analysis approach, right? And that's essentially, to me, that's on the front end. This is where you are now. And then based on these market realities, then you could essentially look at, okay, the various scenarios for your future land use, and then identify what are the potential fiscal impacts 30 years down the road.
Good definition. That's what I needed. Mr. Ferguson?
Yeah, these are short answer questions. What do you believe to be our greatest challenge, and why is your firm best qualified to be hired for this planning effort for Kerrville?
Just kind of listening to the various questions, I think it's probably building consensus is probably going to be one of the biggest challenges. And so, as we noted in various projects experience, we have great experience in building that consensus at the end of the day. As I mentioned earlier, you're not going to get 100%, no time, but as long as we get the majority. Remember, this is the community's plan, and so as long as we create that vision that they create and make sure that that's carried out, we'll be able to build consensus at the end of the day.
And frankly, that's the hardest thing. You can go off and go to the Google or the internet and download another plan and copy it. But what makes your plan different is spending the time that Shad just said is building that consensus, making it intrinsic. That's what's hard. That's what the work is building that consensus. So that is the most difficult thing. We have watched for afar a lot of things that have happened in Kerrville over the years, and I think that's what you really need to do to get that consensus is work. Whoever you select is to work hard on that. What Mr. McDaniel needs is a workbook based on that consensus. He needs a to-do list. We've watched some of the budget hearings, and so you have a pretty good idea of what you need to do on a lot of different fronts. But we're talking about 30 years, and so what he needs is a workbook and a checklist that's community-based, that the public's behind, so you can tell him to do his job.
Okay, we have a few minutes. Did staff have any questions?
I just had one. Wendy, you had mentioned or used the term champions. Can you elaborate on that? That's not something I'm familiar with in terms of the planning process.
Yeah, sure. So on several of these projects, and I think it really stands true to all, you all need, well, you need counsel that's gonna, if unless y'all are gonna stay here forever. I know some of you have been here a long time, but you need future council people. You need people to serve well on your boards and commissions, your P&Z and the various, parks boards or different boards that you have. You need champions out in the community that understand planning. Most people don't. And so part of what we go through a really extensive effort to educate, and I'm not saying that there's not a lot of educated people in this community. I mean, you know a lot more than I do, for certain, but there are certain reasons you make decisions and the types of decisions you need to make that we find it better to help with implementation in the future if we can build champions out of this process that will be along 10 years down the road, especially if we can find those young up-and-coming champions that are going to be here for a long time that maybe one day will sit in your seat or will serve on your parks boards or your P&Z board and help see these things through. So we look for that, and even I know you've already established the committee, but it may be that there may be some subcommittees that come out of that, and we may identify, go to the school district and go, okay, who's your up-and-coming star that ought to be a part of this, or your certain businesses and stuff, and pull some of those in. That's what I meant by that.
Thank you.
Any others by staff?
I just have one quick one, but maybe you can wrap this into your wrap up. How are you going to? And I know that these processes can get very involved. We expect that, certainly. How are you gonna keep us out of the weeds, so to speak, and focused on the bigger picture as we do look down the road 30 years out?
Yeah, good question. I think, again, a lot of that is there needs to be a very kind of methodical process that we stay on, because I'll tell you, it takes a while to do a comp plan, to do it right. I would say usually a year is an average for something that's really involved in looking at all the different sections and chapters. It may be an 18-month process, especially by the time you get through adoption. Anything longer than that, and certainly anything that drags out, you lose momentum. You ask people to come and give their input in community meetings, and people get excited to give their input, and then if you're not driving that home and putting a bow on it in a reasonable time frame, then you lose that, and they don't get to see that. So we're a big believer in developing a process that, yes, it can change and there may be some things, but that we stay on target and that we have an end date in mind. It's like Shad said at the very beginning, begin with the end in mind. We want to have a big celebration on Kerrville's comp plan and whatever creative name that we want to call this at the end of the day. We want to have a big celebration where the community feels like, I was a part of that. I'm excited about my future. I know what I want to go vote for. I know what I want to do. So that's really important to keep that in mind. And I think a lot of that has to do not only with the committee and facilitating that well, but then also just with staff and those that want to get into the weeds, just making sure that we're always keeping, this is long-range plan. It is a long-range plan. And the hardest part of that, in fact, I think I wrote these exact words in the proposal. The hardest part of a long-range plan is keeping it a long-range plan. And so that's a really important point that we have to keep in mind, and yet still get those short-term outcomes out of it.
The larger the committee, the harder it is to keep them focused on the big issues. The more it just is. So we will have to work extra hard to make sure we keep those big picture issues in front of them, or they will get in the weeds and we won't be able to get them out of the weeds. And so we do need to work on that very well. So large committees, it's harder to do, but you have to be prepared with the way you lead them through the discussion and make sure that they're addressing these large. If you start off that way, we have a very good chance of keeping them going that way through the whole thing, like Wendy said.
And hopefully we can work through the chair, to do that.
Right.
I'm sorry he's not here. We'll make him watch this. And Ward, you listen up real well, okay? Because he's going to be on the steering committee.
Okay, good.
Is that your closing remarks? And we've covered a lot of territory in perfect time, I might add. So
We actually have just a little bit more
Okay.
time because they started late, so if y'all had some wrap
I'll just tell you this, and Shad may want to pipe in too, but number one, we really are this excited about doing this. Having worked with Mark just a little bit, and Mayor, I can tell from just how you're running this meeting, having something that you know what to expect, and you know how it's going to be run, and it's well run, and it starts on time, and it ends on time, and it stays on point. It seems like what I'm picking up is that's important to you, and that's how we would prefer to do business. And so we want to do that same type of organized, again, a lot of input, but still something that really everybody is happy with. I mean, I said it at the very beginning, our biggest thing is client service, and we're not one of those firms that's going to come in and do a job and, oh, well, our contract's done and y'all can go home now and we're out of money and we're done. If you're not happy with this plan, we will work until you are happy with this plan. And that is a guarantee. That is how Freese Nichols works, is we want you to be happy, because we don't chase projects, we chase clients. And we want to develop a client relationship that we're going to be with you for the long haul. And not every project is fun, and yes, projects get controversial, and yes, there's always issues, always. But we will always promise to work with your best interest in mind.
very good. Thank you very much. We appreciate all of your time for coming. We enjoyed it.
Thank you. We appreciate y'all.
Do we need a small break then? While they, okay.
Yeah. They're gonna, maybe 5 minutes while they
Yeah,
set
we'll
up?
break at
Yeah.
1:59, okay. Session here at 2:07, and we are happy to welcome the HAF group. And our procedure will be for 20 minutes, you'll be able to make your presentation.
Excellent.
And for sake of time, then each of us will have a round of about 3 questions each for you.
Okay.
And then you can also answer questions from staff, time permitting. Then you'll have 5 minutes to make some closing remarks. So if that works for you, just keep the clock kind of in mind. And Mr. McDaniel is our timekeeper today here, I think. So with that, we're happy to have you here, and you may begin.
All right, thank you very much. For a point of clarification, they look similar, but we have the SOQ that we turned in, the Statement of Qualifications, and then we also have what we handed out today, which is a leave behind of the PowerPoint that we'll be going through. So, Madam Mayor, members of council, staff, thank you very much for having us. We're really excited about the opportunity to potentially work with you on this exciting project. Our point of today is not to rehash everything that we turned over in the Statement of Qualifications. It's about to maybe talk about next steps, some of the preliminary thoughts of what we think the planning process could entail, but understanding very clearly to the point that this is a citizen-driven process, and once the firm is selected, we'll need to work through with the city council, members of the community, and staff to determine what is the appropriate and the right scope of work to take you through to a successful comprehensive plan. One that's not a pretty document that sits on the shelf, but one that's action-oriented and one that becomes truly a blueprint for your staff, your boards and commissions to move forward over the next 5, 10, 15 years and beyond. So again, thank you very much. So real quick, we'll talk about the HAF team, and then I will turn it over to Christian Lentz, the designated project manager for this project, to kind of walk through 4 central components about the planning process, and then we'll go through questions and answers, and then move back into kind of closing statements. Feel free to jump in and ask questions as we go through. We like to have the questions, and we'll do our best to answer as we go through. So why the HAF team? So we're kind of comprised of 3 different groups. We're comprised of HAF being the prime company. We're an interdisciplinary firm of about 700 people, 17 offices in Texas, as well as Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Oklahoma City. With that, though, like other engineering firms that you may be dealing with, we also have a very, very strong planning and landscape architecture practice. So one of the things that you hear about engineering firms that have planners is that you have hundreds of engineers and then you have 1 or 2 planners that kind of fill in some of the details. That's a little bit different than HAF. HAF has about 45 planners and landscape architects, mostly located in our 2 main central Texas communities. That's our Austin office as well as our Richardson office. And we're probably the 2nd largest PLA practice in the state of Texas today. So we don't, as a firm, take planning and design as an ancillary to what we do as an engineering firm. We put it front and center, and we oftentimes lead the way when we're working with communities. Out of that planning and landscape architecture practice, we're not just, our main corporate headquarters up in Richardson. Our staff isn't up there. We actually run a team of 17 out of our Austin office, planners and landscape architects, 7 certified planners, 7 certified or licensed landscape architects that you'll be directly seeing during this project. Our HAF foundation is based on a solid reputation of quality as well as client service, and we bring that to all our projects. But we don't do everything, and we want to make sure that when we come to this engagement process, we understand the key components that we think you need moving forward, and one of those is always economic development. So we bring along Jason Klonch with Catalyst Commercial. It's a group we've worked with many times in the past, and it's one that we feel comfortable with, who understands the economics of similar-sized communities such as yourself. And then and as we all know, HAF's reputation as an engineering firm, we, of course, from a skill set, do not need to bring a local engineer on board, but from the standpoint of understanding the local community, understanding what's being said every day when we're not here on site, we feel it's essential to work with Mr. Hewitt in moving forward. So who's going to be working on this project? Obviously, it starts with the city council, the mayor, the city council. It then moves on to your elected and appointed officials. We understand that the outcomes of this process is going to be community driven. And if it's not community driven, that means we are not building a plan that's implementable after this planning process is done. From that, we'll have a sounding board. It's our understanding that there's already an established 42-member steering committee that we'll be working with. We're excited about that. And then you get down to the next row there. Christian Lentz, which I'll introduce in a second, is our project manager. But these three people, myself, Matt Buchin, the principal in charge, Christian Lentz, our project manager, and Jordan Maddox, our deputy project manager, bring about 50 years of planning experience to this process. And why is that important? It's important because these are the faces, the kind of the leadership team on our end that you're going to see on a daily basis. We're not bringing to this interview our business development people or our marketing people that will talk about what they want to do, but then you'll never see them throughout the rest of the process. This is what you see is what you get, and we'll be with you all the way through this process. I think the other important aspect of that is that each one of our planners here and our support staff are all tenured in the public sector. So what that means is we've sat on the public side, similar to Sabina, in Sabina's position, similar to other staff on your departments. And we've had to sit across from your constituents. We've had to sit in the council meetings, the planning and zoning commission meetings, talking with your neighbors and your citizens, talking with your development community. And why that's important is because we understand those issues that you're looking at, and we're able to feed that into the plan so that it's truly a plan that you can achieve. This is not about lofty goals and a pretty document. It's about something that is implementable and something that takes you forward on a kind of a blueprint action plan basis. Christian Lentz brings about 20 years of experience working in both the public and private sector. Like myself, he brings a national resume, so we've worked in various places across the country. And we bring that set of toolbox to Kerrville to make sure that we understand some of the issues that you'll be moving forward with. Christian?
Okay, thank you, Matt. Let me make sure I get this right. So as Matt had indicated when he started the presentation, it's not really our hope to go through in great detail all the things that you've already read in our submittal. We understand that if there are follow-up questions that you have related to that, then you'll certainly get to that during the question and answer portion of the interview. There are, however, 5 key components of the planning process that we did want to emphasize or bring to your attention, because we think not only are they essential to any comprehensive planning process. When we were responding to your request for qualifications, it was our understanding that these 4 particular components were really important to you in the development process. Now, I also want to reiterate what Matt said about the idea that we are not trying to design a process for you before you start your comprehensive plan. Really why we included what we call a project approach in that statement of qualifications, more than anything, is to elicit some thought, to elicit some conversation among yourselves for how you think you want to proceed going forward, regardless of who you ultimately select. And ultimately, any feedback we get on that also gives us a better idea of exactly what you're looking for in your comprehensive plan document. So we'll talk about 4 components, both the structure or a potential structure of your comprehensive plan, public engagement tools, our approach toward creating a community vision, and also implementation steps. How do you take this plan from idea to actual implementation and change on the ground in your community? So one of the things that we pointed out in the statement of qualifications that we submitted was the idea of meeting your project goal of having a clear, concise, and easy to read document. And certainly, I've written enough comprehensive plans to know that they can get pretty thick and they can get pretty bland. And a lot of people who weren't involved in the process don't know where they really need to look to get to the meat of the document. So one of the things that we would think that you would want to consider is how can you draft a document or a final report that's easy for people to use. So in the statement of qualifications we submitted, we propose a 2-volume document, a community agenda and a community assessment. And quite simply, that community agenda document, that's the actions. That's the future land use map, that's the major thoroughfare map, that's the different land use and character zones, and it's your action plan. So that anybody, whether they were involved in the process or not, They can go right to that and really see what are those engagement or what are those steps that the city wants to take moving forward. And you as elected officials can always very easily go back to that document and access that information. The community assessment document under this particular structure, that would be all of the other background data that if people have extra time late in the evening, that they can read and see how you, the city of Kerrville, went through your community input process, and look at all the research and data that backs up the assumptions that are in your final plan report. We also went out on a limb to a degree, and we took a look at the structure of your existing comprehensive plan, and we said, how might the city consider restructuring a new comprehensive plan to still address all of the particular issues that the old one addressed, and potentially new issues as well. So we show a proposed structure both on the screen and in the handout we provided in the statement of qualifications that illustrates how certain topics from your existing comprehensive plan can be combined into singular chapters because they're topics that largely overlap. The one element, the one topic that we have in a proposed or a potential comprehensive plan structure is the addition of a housing and neighborhoods chapter. Because we look back at all of the 10 chapters of the previous comprehensive plan, and we don't see anything specifically devoted to market rate housing, affordable housing, community services, and really how you preserve and enhance the existing developed residential areas of your community. As we've already indicated, just a proposed structure, a potential structure to get people thinking, and honestly, there's a whole host of other chapters or focus areas that a community may choose to incorporate in their comprehensive plan. Regarding in public engagement, we've understood very clearly that it's a goal that your engagement process is a process where the maximum number of citizens, property owners, business owners can participate. And so certainly we want to bring forth different ways that we can provide public engagement opportunities on site and online. And the reason that's important is we know that everybody participates in public processes in a different manner. Some people are very comfortable getting up in front of the podium. I'm not one of those people, but some people are very comfortable getting up in front of the podium and speaking their mind in a public forum. Other people would rather go to that survey that we've posted online, and when it's late at night and they're doing their web browsing, take 10 to 15 minutes, fill that survey out, and participate in that fashion. And then there's a whole host of other public participation steps that people, or engagement activities that people can participate in. Our statement of qualifications includes a list of on-site and online engagement techniques that we have used in different comprehensive planning projects in the past. I think one of the things that it's very important to point out on this particular slide is the issue of branding your comprehensive planning process. One of the hardest things to do at the beginning of a comprehensive planning process is develop that vision because it's so ambiguous and a lot of people don't understand, what exactly do you mean by a community vision or general community principles? So a way to get people really on board with the process and engaged in the process is develop those branding features on the front end because it's a fun activity, it's a fun exercise that can get people really engaged in developing a new vision for their community. Also, we talk about a project website because it's very important that the city govern or oversee the public input process, the online process that's going to take place in your comprehensive plan. You want to frame the discussion rather than having others frame the discussion who might not be involved in the comprehensive planning process on a day-to-day basis. And then I'll say a word about on-site activities and public workshops, public meetings, and public open houses. Our experience is that particularly when you're having large public gatherings, that a wonderful format is really to use a public open house where you have boards, you have activities, you have stations that people can go around to, and it offers your planners that you've hired and your engineers the opportunity to talk with people one-on-one. I've been in a ton of public meetings where people want to take the microphone and they want to kind of own the meeting. And while some people really enjoy that and want to hear that, other people feel like they can't actually participate in the process. We get a lot more constructive feedback when we can talk to people one-on-one. So more times than not, we like the informal open house format where we're getting to talk to people on an individual basis. talking about vision. The comprehensive plan, the project goals talk about best practices in planning, urban design, livability, and resiliency. When it comes to creating or assisting you in creating a new community vision moving forward, Half Associates has a lot of experience in hill country communities, in countries of a similar size. And one of the most important things that we need to recognize is that, yes, we're the planners from Austin and we're the engineers from San Antonio, but this is Kerrville. So we don't need to bring Austin to Kerrville. We need to respect the small town scales of the communities that we are working in. We understand that through the visioning process and through the comprehensive planning process, there may be room in your community for new types of development, different types of development, higher intensity development. But we also understand that there's a lot of people that say, we want to preserve the good things about our small town character and scale. So this image and the subsequent image show two of the outcomes of two of the visioning exercises that we did with Marble Falls during their comprehensive planning process. So not only do we recognize and appreciate when we go to a community that we need to talk to them about the scale and character of community that they're comfortable with, but we also understand that when people indicate to us, well, we want to make sure that new development also reflects that character, that new development can't always reflect all of those characteristics about your historic neighborhoods and downtowns that you like. And we understand that most communities today, the vast majority of our community footprint is really geared toward auto-oriented type of development. So once again, we went out on a limb a little bit and we took one of your highway corridors and we sketched it up and just showed you a different perspective on a community gateway. One of the reasons we wanted to just have a little fun and play around with this image is to just emphasize how we recognize that these major thoroughfares, these major gateways into your communities are really, that's the first impression. That's the first impression that you have that you can sell yourself, you can sell your community to potential new investors, to potential new residents. And that how you present yourself on those key corridors is really going to dictate the long-term, the longevity of being able to attract private investment and being able to enhance overall general quality of life for the people that live in Kerrville. So we'll talk for just a couple minutes. I know we only have a few more minutes left about implementation. Just like any planner, well, I'll tell you, I've done enough plans in my life that even I get tired of planning at some point. I want to get to the point where we're actually turning that plan into action. And we understand that Kerrville wants an actionable plan as well. So we understand that loud and clear because unlike the other slides, there's 3 project goals from the RFQ that talk to that indicate we want to make sure that one of the outcomes of this planning process is really the steps on how we're going to move forward and we're going to implement these wonderful ideas that we've generated together. So oftentimes, the way we like to work with communities to categorize and build immediate, near-term, short-term work programs is to clarify that there are different types of implementation measures. That certainly there are regulations that you may have to revisit, there's policies that you might have to change, there are financial investments, but even so, it's very important for people to recognize that even one of the outcomes of a comprehensive plan or a comprehensive community study may be additional studies as well. Because there still is, when you're in a comprehensive plan, you're taking a broad view of your community. And there are going to be more specific design and engineering details that are going to need to be investigated if you're going to look in more detail to things like stormwater management and other similar infrastructure issues. So there are a few implementation tools that we wanted to bring to your attention that we have found are really the most common implementation tools that end up being the drivers of your comprehensive planning implementation process. Jordan?
Thank you, Christian. So one of the things that we understand as a firm is that when a comprehensive plan is completed, it doesn't stop there. It really has to, you have to have a strong implementation plan in order to carry forth the vision of the community. One of the things that was mentioned was our public sector experience as planners. I spent many years at the city of Georgetown. It wasn't much larger than Kerrville when I started there, and we had to quickly implement a new comprehensive plan. We understand some of the difficulties of that. We understand if you put the right tools in place, it can make the implementation part of that plan much more successful for the people that are on the front lines, that are doing the staff planning, look at the budgeting, looking at the capital improvement plans. So one of the things that we wanted to do is discuss some of those tools that we as a firm have experience both in our public sector and our private sector work actually putting into place for communities. Capital improvement programming, we want to take a look at the existing process, help the community figure out where moving forward in the future the right investments can be made, the right evaluation tools, looking at your public utilities, looking at your transportation system, also looking at land development codes and understanding, do you have the right codes in place? Do you have the right processes to review those codes? What components of those codes can now be viewed under the new vision of the comprehensive plan? How can they be reevaluated if necessary, tweaked, and furthered to promote that new vision of the community? And part of the reason that we mention these tools is this is really our starting point. We understand as we're writing this comprehensive plan, helping the staff and the community get to that end goal, that we know on the back end, once that plan is completed and adopted by the City Council, how the real work needs to begin. And so our work pulls together both the future implementation and that visioning process together. Code administration, again, figuring out, do you have the right processes in place? Do the staff have the tools that they understand how to provide for code compliance? Pre-applications, working with the development community, working with the utilities, moving forward, making sure that everything is clear and concise and understandable. And also fiscal impact analysis, understanding the revenue side. Do you have some of the investments that you would like to make as part of this comprehensive plan? Do the financial analyses line up? That's both evaluating private development and understanding public long-term investments. We at HAF have worked on both sides. We work for developers. We do land planning. We have worked on capital improvement plans. We understand how some of these tools work and how they can be put in place to forward that vision of the comprehensive plan. So it doesn't stop at the plan for us, and we understand tying all those things together right from the outset.
Okay, I think we're out of time on the presentation, so.
Excellent.
We will have an
Yep,
opportunity to do this piece at the end.
Absolutely. While you're preparing your questions, I'd just like to bring out a couple of examples of recent planning efforts that we've undertaken.
You know, I have a small car.
Small car.
I'm kidding. There's a lot of material.
We'll take those back. Oh, okay. Let's just maybe kind of page through as we're talking.
Just to look at. I got you. Did you say we're ready for
Questions?
Okay. All right, for whoever's ready, we'll, as I mentioned before, we'll just begin and kind of go around among us and have about 2 minutes or so for each question. So I'll begin. What part of your team's experience with a comprehensive planning effort, if any, would you say goes beyond land use and transportation planning?
Well, actually, I would say that the visioning part of the team goes beyond that, our landscape architecture. Matt, Jordan, and I all work in the planning and landscape architecture studio at HAF Associates. So beyond the typical planning, we've got the design experience right in-house, right in the next office, right across the next partition, to actually assist in taking some of the written ideas that are brought to the people's attention and putting those in graphic form as well. In addition, our team is made up of engineers from our San Antonio office and also Mr. Hewitt right here in Kerrville. They provide us immediate expertise on water, wastewater, storm drainage as well. And we're supported, we're an interdisciplinary firm as well. And any questions that we couldn't immediately answer right here up at the podium today, we do have additional transportation experts and other skill sets that are housed at our other HAF offices around the state.
And I think an important point, if you talk to some of the other firms out there, they may have 100 to 200 comp plans that they've written. I'll tell you that's not our case. We have done about 20 comprehensive plans under the HAF name. That's not including our background experience. But most of those plans are for similar sized communities who are trying to protect their unique sense of character. For example, Marble Falls, Bernie, Bastrop, Buda, very similar sized cities, all going through very similar issues that you are. But the key point of this is that while we've done maybe 20 comprehensive plans, at the same time, we've done over 150 of the follow-up plans. Park master plans, corridor plans, zoning and land development codes, downtown master plans, active transportation plans. So those more refined studies are really the next steps, really you get down to the details of how you make it happen. Because we do that work, we're able to then take that level of experience and feed that back into the comprehensive plan so that we set the stage from that comp plan to practice connection.
Okay. Mr. Vogel?
A city of any size has differing viewpoints on both sides of pro-growth versus non-growth argument. Describe an instance where you have faced the question squarely.
Well, I mean, ultimately, the response to that is that too much of a good thing or none of a good thing, isn't necessarily going to be ideal for your community. There is, without growth, your community risks stagnation. But the question isn't no growth or growth, absolute growth. The question is trying to determine the scale of growth that's actually appropriate for a community. The other thing is some people think of growth as new development on the fringe of the community. Growth can also take form of redevelopment within the built areas of your community and the form that that's going to take. So ultimately, when you're asked the question squarely, unfortunately, the answer isn't necessarily a direct answer. It's an answer that is revealed to us in each community over time based on additional feedback that we're going to get through the planning process.
Thank you. Mr. Baruti?
Okay, so this is a 20, 30-year plan. In what ways will you be able to assist us to make sure that this plan is relevant for 30 years?
I mean, ultimately, the vision itself is for a 20 or 30-year period. But what we make sure that your comprehensive plan includes is near-term, short-term work programs that say over the course of the next 5 years or so, here are the specific action steps or strategies that you need to take to start implementing it. Now, in addition to that, we recognize that community conditions are going to change over time, and so your vision, over the course of 5 to 10 years is going to have to change slightly. So within the implementation programs that we include in comprehensive plans, we also work with your staff and with the public officials to identify the plan review and the plan amendment process to ensure that it stays relevant. And also how to revisit that short-term work program and reprioritize immediate actions or strategies that you need to start at the 5-year point and work forward from there.
Sure. Ms. Summerlin?
How would you propose to assist us in ensuring that we retain what makes Kerrville unique, yet make the most of the growth that will come and keep us thriving?
Yeah, well, one of the issues, and I brought it up with the comprehensive plan elements, that when I look through the existing comprehensive plan, I said, well, to myself, why isn't there specifically a housing and neighborhoods chapter? Because comprehensive plans are typically so focused on that dynamic growth, that new growth moving outward from the city core. Oftentimes they can forget that you can lose your soul in the process. And I've worked in a lot of communities that are so focused on that outward growth that they don't put anything in place to preserve the downtown, to preserve the center city neighborhoods. And a lot of times I wouldn't say who, but you could equate it to an apple. And it looks nice and shiny on the outside, but when you bite into it, every once in a while you buy an apple at the store, you get a nasty surprise in the middle. So the comprehensive planning process has to make sure that it includes a wide array of actions and strategies to ensure that your neighborhood stays stable and that they are also, just like getting investment on the edge of town, they also remain primed for new investments so that they can be rejuvenated as the community grows.
And I think the other part of that is, you look at the third board over there talking about community character, the one third from the left. So a lot of communities will approach their future land use from the standpoint of separation of uses and where is it appropriate to have every apartment complex and where's to have a larger lot. When we look at a comprehensive plan, we think about it from the standpoint of how do we protect differing areas of community character. And that starts with a comprehensive plan, but then feeds into the regulations to make it happen. So as part of a process, it's not only about us talking to you about community character, it's about engaging the citizens and the constituency about what they want differing areas of character to be, so that we're educating them through the process. So by the time we get to the end, they understand that this area over here in downtown should look and feel different than what a auto-oriented corridor should look like over here, even though they have the same uses. So that's part of an education process that we'll walk through as we go through a comprehensive planning process.
Mr. Ferguson?
Yeah. Have you identified or made a reasonable assumption for an infrastructure or research challenges that we may be particularly concerning to you?
I mean, ultimately, our view is we kind of come in with a clean slate. I will admit, and we know that we don't perhaps know as much on a day-to-day basis of your community as perhaps some of our competitors that are coming in to talk to you. So we haven't drawn any preliminary conclusions of what needs to be fixed, because as professional planners and engineers, we can look around and we can understand where there may be issues in infrastructure. But we can't necessarily understand before we've talked to people in the community what the priorities are. Because we also recognize that smaller communities, rural communities, ultimately it's not as easy as identifying all of these issues and here's how you address all of them without prioritizing them, because we know that each community we work with is going to have fiscal constraints in addressing those issues.
And that's why we felt it was essential to bring Mr. Hewitt on board to make sure that we knew we had an inside look at some of the issues that are going on, since he's done this for over 30 years in the city.
Well, and we all know how important water supply here is for Kerrville. That's a huge component. Sewer capacity, sometimes we're running into problems with sewer capacity, sidewalks throughout the community, road condition, we get a good assessment on that. So those are just a few of the key infrastructure components that I would say are important.
And we kind of briefly talked about the comp plan and then the more refined studies. So one of the priorities of the comp plan is that we understand that the city over the past couple of years has done some more detailed studies. But the purpose of the comprehensive plan is to take all of those studies that you've done, understand and analyze what's working and what's not working, look at it as a whole city, look at how all the different plans are integrated, how they work together, and bring a fresh perspective on how the city should move forward from a community-wide level. And then the plan itself needs to set an action framework of how we should, or how you should, go back and take the next steps on your further studies that you will do over time. Because even the refined studies get updated over a course of time. So this plan needs to speak to it as a community as a whole and lay the framework for what needs to be done the next time you look at those further refined studies.
Might add too, one of the things that Mr. Hewitt and myself and my team will bring is that, sorry, jump over here, sorry. One of the things that Mr. Hewitt and the rest of our engineering team that we have will bring is we've worked on, we've gone from the public infrastructure perspective, we've taken things from study level all the way through design and construction administration, that kind of thing. So we kind of understand some of those challenges. But to their point, we want to make sure that we're focusing our efforts on the areas that need it the most, that the community sees are those most important areas first. And we do have the experience and the expertise with which to truly identify those problems. If we do need to reevaluate your CIP program, that we know where to take it, or things to reprioritize, that we're getting the most bang for the buck that you need.
Describe an experience that your team has had involving two seemingly opposing sides of a local issue and how you facilitated or presented middle ground.
Well, I would attest that any planning process, that's the case. Part of our framework is to understand both sides of the spectrum. We understand that we're bringing a outside level of professional understanding and technical experience, but this is your community, and as part of our process, part of any planning process, we would have to walk the community through and bring them together on the points that they are in agreement with, and then figure out what the consensus is for moving forward. There's always, and if you listen to a lot of the different viewpoints out there, and particularly in this day and age in our political spectrum, you only hear about the two extremes, and the majority of the work that gets done is somewhere in the middle. And as our job as facilitators, as planners and educators, is to understand how to bring both sides together to find that common ground so that we're able to move forward with an action agenda that everyone agrees with. And I'll tell you right now, not everyone's going to say, we got everything we want. And that's really, if you take one output of a planning process, it's that the consensus says, we're okay with everything, that we can move forward. But no one's gonna be 100% satisfied.
Okay. Mr. Vogel?
The Guadalupe River is also one of our greatest assets. Describe how you might address it in the comprehensive plan.
Well, certainly we need to address it from both an environmental quality standpoint and just a general quality of life and recreation standpoint. You know, when we look at these rivers, we know that it is going to be a primary outfall for the stormwater drainage issues that you're dealing with in Kerrville. Water quality and the ability to continue to use that is always going to be a concern. So as we're doing the planning process, particularly on the front end when we're talking about the visioning process, we need to identify those key riverine corridors and those floodplain corridors and come to a determination with the members of the public that are participating in the process fairly early on how you want to treat those corridors and incorporate them into the overall land use and development scenario in the future.
And every city is unique, but when you boil it down to, I guess, the art of planning, they have a lot of similar issues. So it's not too similar than what we had to work with in Marble Falls on their interaction between downtown, their lakefront park, and Lake Marble Falls. It's not too different than we had to deal with in Bastrop along the Colorado River. It's not too different that we had to do up in the Trinity River up in Dallas. Ennis, their lakefront property. So there's certain tools in the toolbox that we can bring to the table that helps us answer those questions and ask the right questions to the community to figure out what they truly want out of that. Is it protection? Is it off limits? Is it environmental only? Is it recreation? Is it access? You know, what are they concerned about? And our job is to figure that out.
You can also speak very intelligently about low impact development techniques and things like that if you want to have some special use districts. Certainly areas that are near the major water courses that you want to make sure you protect from a development standpoint, and making sure that your code allows for additional water quality implementation, things like that will help protect those waterways. We're working with the city of Bulverde currently on updating their code on several of those things. Where very similarly, water quality and quantity are major issues.
Bernie's having a nightmare there.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Mr. Broody.
There are many theories regarding the best approach to thoroughfare and land use planning. Describe the approaches, or some of the approaches that you believe would be a best fit for Kerrville.
I mean, ultimately, even though we live today, we're developing with different development patterns. As a planner, we tend to go back to some of the early principles of planning and understanding that, you know, an effective transportation system and land use system allows for us to disperse traffic rather than collecting it all on specific thoroughfares and having to suffer through the consequences of the traffic problems that are generated by not having enough outlets and enough ways for people to access different neighborhoods within the community and into and out of the community itself.
And I think over time, we've gotten away, meaning the general community, have gotten away from looking at our streets as a part of the community. We've looked at it from a standpoint of how to get traffic from A to B. That was the only consideration. We know that many communities, like Kerrville, like many that we've worked in, they understand that the interface between the thoroughfare and the built environment is essential. And as I said before, understanding how that interface differs in different areas of character of the community is what we feed into the comprehensive plan, so that when you go to do your thoroughfare connections, whether it's arterials or minor arterials or collectors or local streets, that framework understands the connection between what the street should look like, what the public area should look like, and how it interacts with your built environment.
In addition to that, when it comes to thoroughfare efficiency, you know, we understand that there are constraints with topography and the ability to provide those ideal number of connections throughout your community. So when it comes to your thoroughfares, there is the issue of maximizing the functionality of that thoroughfare and talking about ways that you can regulate access onto and off of those major thoroughfares. Because the biggest issue when it comes to traffic issues, the biggest issues you're going to get on your thoroughfares aren't necessarily always the volume issues. They're the issues with motor vehicle motions onto and off of that thoroughfare, and specifically unconstrained movements onto and off of that thoroughfare, or heck, that person who comes flying out and flies right across the thoroughfare.
In particular, Suzuki's. Okay. Ms.
Our-
Summerlin?
Our topography presents both opportunities and challenges. Describe both as you see them.
Well, as far as an opportunity, when you're coming in on Highway 16 into Kerrville, there's your opportunity right there. It's absolutely gorgeous. So, and even though that you've got topographic constraints, rather than trying to level everything off, maintaining that topography and incorporating it into your long-term development character is very important to do. And so we certainly believe and would hope that the citizens of Kerrville would want to promote a future development pattern where those topographic assets are maintained. Now, on the flip side, when it comes to the challenges, really, and not by fighting Mother Nature as much, but trying to maintain those scenic assets that you have by building with them instead of against them, you can overcome a lot of challenges when it comes to new growth and development.
Mr. Ferguson?
Yeah, your team appears to cover the bases that would be included in the plan. Would you please describe your approach to collaborating with one another and in coordinating planning efforts with city staff?
Certainly, it's very important for us on the front end that any community we work with is identifying a specific project director. Ultimately, through the planning process, we're going to make contact with multiple city staff and work with multiple city staff where we need to. But at the end of the day, input, feedback that's coming to us or that we're sending to the city in general needs to go through that central individual, that central repository, so that there is some degree of control to how that contact is taking place, and that we're ensuring that we're all hearing the same things from the city, and then everybody on city staff is hearing the same things from us. For the most part, with most of our team, the collaboration would be fairly easy. Matt's office is right next door to mine. Jordan's office is just down the hall. A lot of the planners and landscape designers that we would have working on this particular plan are right there within a few feet from us. We're doing nothing but collaborating with each other all day. And fortunately, we've got Josh and other members of our team in our San Antonio office that also have direct communication with each other, also have the ability, just as much of us as us, to reach Kerrville at a moment's notice if necessary. And then fortunately, we're very happy to have Mr. Hewitt on our team as well to help provide some eyes and ears on the ground, and also to help us interpret some things about your community that we may see from one perspective because we've worked in so many communities, but we haven't necessarily worked in Kerrville.
If I can add one thing about, at least relative to the engineering and the planning staff, and the fact that, like they mentioned, we are integral with our planners and all the public sector work that we do, is that they have a good understanding when they start getting down into the details, that we can kind of help them along with the engineering challenges and some of those opportunities and challenges you have with infrastructure design or whatever, or even figuring out some of the major obstacles with some of the overall planning members. And I work with these guys constantly on different things, and they help us out with really the communication side. We do a lot of drainage and public infrastructure stuff, and that communication to not only the council members and stakeholders in the public, but also with the citizens, and trying to make sure we do a lot of really good engineering work, but being able to communicate that. And these guys are excellent at that.
And I want to add one point. I mean, there are a lot of people in our firm, on our team, that aren't listed in the submittal we gave you. So just like I said, kind of tongue-in-cheek, I can go right to Matt next door. I mean, literally, I can, anytime I want. Literally, when we have an issue, we get up, we go down the hall, we go to hydrology, we ask them about it. They spend some time helping us with the problem. I have another issue with your major thoroughfares. I go down the hall and I talk to our transportation engineers and planners. They don't have any problem setting aside time for us when we need it to give us that additional expertise or perspective that we didn't know that we were going to need. when we started the project.
And here's a perfect example of that. So I was writing the Cibolo comprehensive plan, and they were dealing with some drainage issues. Obviously, you know, they have, well, north end is I-35, south end I-10, but they're bisected by FM 78. Well, they had drainage issues and flooding issues because of the backup of FM 78. And coming from a planning perspective, I said, what better opportunity to have a regional retention combined with a park right off of downtown. It becomes a great community amenity. I was like, maybe I should vet that with our engineers beforehand. And I walked down, talked to our hydrologists. They're like, you know what, we've actually analyzed that corridor. They looked at it and they said it would be a perfect solution provided you wanted about 1 foot of detention, because other than that, it's not going to physically work. So they saved me from embarrassing myself in front of the community. But it goes further. So as a joke, I was talking with the city staff, and I said, not as a joke, but I was like, I was going to propose this, but it won't work. And you know what they told me? In their last planning process, a planner proposed it. It got funded by a couple millions of dollars. They got the funding to design it. The engineers came in, and the engineers said, this isn't going to work. So they used that funding about a mile downstream on other drainage projects. But the point is, as a planner, without the technical expertise of this group, I would have looked like I had no credibility. And that's why we come forth as an interdisciplinary firm.
I wanted to add one other thing. As a team member, I can say absolutely that the city of Kerrville is my most important and my favorite client. And I don't know how many other consultants who'd come in here and say that. So it's very important.
And I have one more point on this. I know we're belaboring this point, but I feel like there's one more point to make. And when we come in on the first day of this public kickoff, one of the first groups that we will meet with is the department heads or their designees. And because of that, we know the community is going to give us their vision for where they want to go. We know that the council is going to kind of vet what the community wants and provide that understanding. But it's going to be staff that really makes it happen. And why they're going to make it happen? Because every year in an annual budget, as part of the capital improvement program, as part of applications that come back before your appointed boards and commissions, and eventually to you, gets initiated and vetted by your staff. If we don't get them on board with this process as well, it's going to be a plan that sits on the shelf. So they are an essential part of making sure they're a partner in what we're trying to help you move forward with on your community blueprint for the future.
Okay.
And
Quickly,
sorry to belabor that point.
this is our last round here from council anyway. How would you propose to maximize citizen and stakeholder participation if you were selected? And I want to tag on to that. In doing so, we'd like to know how many projects you engage in simultaneously.
You know, ultimately, as a project manager, speaking to that, generally I would have 3 principal projects, and I may have a couple smaller projects that are either wrapping up, or they're just small in scale, and much of the work is being done by others that are assisting me on that particular project. So typically, I'll carry about 3 major projects at any given time throughout the period. As far as public engagement goes, you know, I think we try to highlight within the statement of qualifications all of the different public engagement techniques that we've used in the past to elicit citizen involvement. And really, ultimately, the techniques that we would apply to Kerrville really depend on the type of feedback ultimately we're getting from the city as far as, you know, we really think that is something that we want to incorporate into our process. We think that tool is an important tool for us. That whole kit of tools and engagement ideas that we included in that statement of qualifications are certainly things that we can apply to the Kerrville process. But again, the ones that ultimately are applied to elicit the widest range of public input are to be determined based on further conversation with you.
Okay. Mr. Vogel?
This planning effort will extend 2 miles beyond the city's current city limits. How would you propose that we engage Kerr County stakeholders in the process?
Well, in any planning process, we focus on the city limits, but then we also have to focus on the greater community that associates themselves with Kerrville, whether that's your statutory ETJ or a larger period. Some jurisdictions like Bastrop had a small statutory ETJ, and they had one of the like 172 square mile voluntary ETJ. So it's really about when we go through and develop that that framework for the engagement about developing how we target the greater community. But inevitably, some cities will say, I don't care what they think, I'm focused on my taxpayers within the city limits, but not thinking the fact that maybe a year from now, that person right in your outside the ETJ is going to be a taxpayer, and they remember that they weren't involved. So from our standpoint, we always approach it from an inclusive standpoint and make sure that we understand where the greater community wants to go, but acknowledging the fact that the people within the city limits, as represented by the city council, is a decision-making body. So we try to bring that to the table and make sure we have all sides of the perspective so you can make an informed decision moving forward.
So we'd also equip you guys, I mean, if you're talking about the politics involved with Kerr County and relative to what the city does itself, the city of Kerrville does, we'll provide you and work with you guys to help bridge those gaps, and if there are gaps, and then provide them with the information that we're trying to do. The background, we do mostly public sector work, so in that regard, we don't have a lot of developer interest. We're here for you on the public side and trying to help bridge those kind of gaps.
Mr. Birdie?
If you have one, what would be your opinion of where our most obvious infrastructure bottlenecks controlling our growth capacity are here in Kerrville, whether that's human, geographic, financial, whatever?
Well, ultimately, we find a lot of smaller communities, their ability to attract growth is dependent on the degree to which they want to proactively invest in their public infrastructure, and perhaps extend proactively utilities to key growth areas to try to attract new types of development that they might not necessarily have in their community today, but also that provide for perhaps housing different types of housing or different types of commercial development that are current demographic gaps that are otherwise keeping Kerrville from attracting additional investment.
And it's different for every community. So for example, in the 2009 planning process for Marble Falls, if you boil that entire plan down to one key takeaway, it was getting infrastructure down to 281 and 71 for a regional hospital. That was the one key takeaway. As the output of that plan, they got infrastructure down to 281 and 71 and now have a regional hospital. So 5 years later, they're like, now that we have this, we didn't have the blueprint for what to do next. So they brought us back in, not us, we didn't do the first plan. They brought us in to work with them about, now that they have the economic impetus, the catalyst project, where do they go next? That's what the discussion about infrastructure should entail. How does the city want to use it and extend it in order to make things happen where and when they want?
But that's key. Marble Falls decided they wanted to do that. It was their determination, so they are the community, they're the decision makers that decided we are proactively making that happen.
Okay. We're working with Bernie now on a very similar issue. They want a wide variety of demographics. They don't have young professionals living in Bernie. Everyone's commuting in, and they're trying to drive some growth within their community, but they don't have apartments. They don't have some of the more affordable housing. It's very much it's very uniform, and so they're having trouble attracting that growth. So we're working with them on that similar problem.
So the answer there is annex like crazy.
So both Marble Falls and Bastrop had same issues. We worked particularly with our economic development folks, or their economic development corporation folks. What was interesting to me is that we set a meeting up with the EDC in Marble Falls, and think about all the things. I know there's some past EDC members on the council, but think about all the things you focused on. We spent an hour and a half talking about one issue, and that issue was housing, of which something the EDC doesn't do, but the fact that they had this new regional hospital and everyone coming to the hospital was saying the same thing. I can't get my people to come here because the people that come here have no place to live. So Marble Falls' issue was, how do we deal with affordable housing, the market rate housing, and get that wide range of spectrum so that we have a complete community for everyone to come and work and live in this area.
And that was a shared issue of emphasis in Bastrop as well.
All right, Ms. Summerlin.
Let me see. What experience does your team have with economic development, and what strategies do you see as relevant to Kerrville?
ultimately, the team, one of the team members who unfortunately couldn't be here is Jason Claunch with Catalyst Commercial. Let me give you a little idea of Jason's background. Before he started Catalyst Commercial, he worked for many years with the Billingsley Company. He was responsible with Billingsley Company for consolidating or compiling the agreements to create public infrastructure districts, to create tax increment refinancing zones, to help fund the development of super target centers in different communities in the state. I bring that up as part of his background to say we have a team member who intimately knows what it takes, both from a market analysis standpoint and also through public-private partnerships, to generate investment in different communities.
And is he, Jason Claunch, the member of your team, or is it one of his associates?
It'll be Jason who will be involved in this project.
And we've worked with him all across Texas.
Okay, Mr. Ferguson?
Why is your firm most qualified to be hired for this planning effort for Kerrville?
You're stealing my thunder from the end. I think it boils down to a couple key topics, and maybe I may kind of hit on this. As I said before, what you see is what you get. We're not a team that's standing before you whose job is to do business development and build future relationships and come in and win the project. This is the team that's going to do this project. That's what we do. I was the project manager of Marble Falls. Christian was the project manager of Bastrop. We work together to make sure that what you are seeing today is who your community is going to see in the future. And why is that important? As I mentioned before, just even the three of us right here, irrespective of the other 14 PLA staff I have in my office in Austin, is that 50 years of experience standing in front of you right now is the same 50 years of experience you're going to be seeing all the way through the process. So when we're talking with your community, we're talking with your citizens, your development community, people on both ends of the spectrum, we're talking from it with 50 years of experience. This is not a group where you come in and once we leave, the actual group comes in and someone with 4 years experience is now the one standing up in front of every meeting trying to convey what they know and do not know about the planning process. Because I'll tell you right now, the planning process, the comprehensive planning process, particularly when you're in any of these meetings, has nothing to do with what we're showing you on the screen. It's what's going to come out of this table and the community meeting and the stakeholder meetings, and it's the questions they're going to ask that have nothing to do with what we're trying to show on the screen, but has everything to do about what you're all concerned about. So that takes a level of experience to understand how to bring those types of feedback and engagement back into the fold to make sure we keep moving forward to come up with a blueprint for your future. So that's one. It's the experience and depth of knowledge. I mentioned before, local government background. We aren't people that came out of school 5 years ago and we've learned all the best practices moving forward. All of our experience is tenured in the public sector, so we've had to deal with the situations and the meetings that Sabina deals with and her staff deals with on a daily basis. Not only are we planners and landscape architects, but we have 700 people that do everything that you could possibly think of with related to the follow-up. The engineers, the architects, the surveys. We do public sector, we do private sector. So on one side, we're dealing with cities about where you want to go, but on the other side, we're dealing with developers saying, but that's not feasible. I can't market that, I can't do it. So between those interactions, we bring those back into the fold so that your comprehensive plan builds that into the framework of the comprehensive plan. And I always like to mention this fact, that planning, when you go through this process, is all about somebody else's property. And you want it to look good, and you want landscaping and greater building materials and X, Y, Z, A, B, C. And then when you get to the implementation side, particularly when you're talking about your follow-up regulations, the conversation changes and it now becomes about my property. And as a resident, about what type of house I can live in. And as a business owner, what is my parking lot? Why are you telling me I have to have trees in my parking lot and I have to add a 25-foot landscape strip? So that conversation changes from planning to implementation. And because it does that, And because we understand that perspective from writing land development regulations and having those conversations, we're able to ask those questions during the planning process so that we get to the end and we're not having a new conversation moving forward. That's not the same movement as what we have in the planning process. We'll bring those up as we go through the planning process to have those tough conversations so that when we get to the end, you truly have a blueprint that your community wants to move forward with and believes in. And what the important point of that is, if they support it, it is able to get implemented. If they don't support it, no matter what you want to do, it's not going to move forward, because that's, the community will come out in force saying this is not what we wanted. And so our job is to make that move forward. And final point or two, this is a plan to practice. I kind of been hinting at that. You know, not only we do comprehensive plans, but we do all the follow-up work that, and then circles back into the planning process. And then to tie it up to award winning. And just in the past year alone, the Marble Falls Comp Plan that I was a PM on won the Central Texas Comp Plan of the Year Award. It also won the State of Texas APA Award. We just found out yesterday, Christian, as PM of the Bastrop Plan, just won Central Texas Plan of the Year Award. So that's 2 years in a row. And we tell you that not to brag and toot our own horn. We tell you that because our planning, that's what it sounds like, right? No, but we tell you that because we believe it's a testament to our work and also our interaction and engagement with the communities that we work with. And as you look through the RFQ or the SOQ that we turned in, you'll see letters from our committee members, our staff people, our elected officials that talk about how we work with the city and how we think we're the right team to move forward with you as well.
Gentlemen, we got the sign there for the conclusion, and if you wanted to take times for any staff questions, that's up to you.
Just a quick follow-up.
Okay.
So in the development of the plans that y'all have been associated with, how large have the steering committees been in terms of the number of people?
Yeah, generally the steering committees have been up to about 20 people. We know that you've appointed a steering committee that's larger. All I'll say is it's not typically the size that we've worked with, but nonetheless, that's part of the reason it's important to point out that we have Matt, myself, and Jordan as well, because we look at the idea of even a larger steering committee and the possibility of that steering committee broken up into subcommittees as something that, you know, it's going to be difficult for one individual to manage. And so that's why we point out I guess the three-headed leadership of the project that can assist each other in managing these meetings of different stakeholder sizes.
How long would you envision the process taking?
Well, we had seen that there was a tentative process in the request for qualifications of 12 months. I would just offer that that is very difficult depending on the level of public engagement you think you want and depending on the diversity of topics that you want to address in your comprehensive plan. Typically, a comprehensive planning process that we're engaged in is roughly a 15-month process because there's kind of extremes on either end. 12 months can be extremely difficult, especially when you're trying to pack in a lot of public input. But on the flip side, 18 months, people have forgotten what they said the first meeting. And people get tired. So generally about 15 months is what, from our experience, is the length or duration of process that's been ideal.
Some of those details are unknown. For example, last time you did, 17 committee meetings, 5 workshops, 3 open houses, really until we engage with you to figure out what scale and where we want to go, really would dictate kind of what that length would be.
We're not prepared to do that in open session today, but I would ask you if you would, under separate cover, several of us had a question, if you would just address, and again under separate cover, and Mr. McDaniel can get it to us, briefly a description of what happened in the Alamo Independent School District, Mercedes, and Rio Grande. And I know there's always issues that there's 2 sides, so we just would like a brief explanation under separate cover.
Okay, Alamo Independent School District, and there was, and
this was
your proposal. Yeah.
Okay.
Your disclosure.
Okay.
Other than that, I guess that wraps up our question and answer and your presentation, and we appreciate it, gentlemen, so much. Your coming and your answers and your willingness to respond to us. And so we have one more group waiting anxiously, I'm sure, but we'll take a little break at 3:11 so that they can disassemble and the next group can ramp up?
I'd just like to finish with that we would love to have the opportunity to work with you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Regular session here at 3:21. And the format again is that we will have a presentation of about 20 minutes from your group, and then we will have a round of questions from council members, and then try to keep that to 3 rounds of questions. And then if we have time at the end, staff may have some questions, and then you'll have a time for a closing. So if that works well for you, we welcome you here. We thank you for coming and your response, and we are ready to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Mayor White and members of the Kerrville City Council. My name is Mark Bowers, and if it's okay, before we start the formal presentation, we're going to let each of our team members introduce themselves in a little bit more detail. Mark Bowers, I'm a planner, landscape architect. My degree is landscape architecture, but I've always worked as a planner and urban designer. I am the project manager on the project and will be leading many of the urban design and land use planning tasks. Bill?
Hi, I'm Bill Cunningham. I'm a principal with Ricker Cunningham. My partner Ann Ricker and I are real estate economists, and what we generally do as part of these planning processes is provide the market expertise, the economic expertise, fiscal impact. Those are the kinds of things that we'll be looking at as we develop a plan, as we all develop a plan for the community.
And my name is Monica Hyde, and my firm is Prologue Planning Services, and I come to you after having spent 31 years at the city of Richardson, so in the planning department. So I've got a little bit different perspective on projects like this than the consultants in the private sector might have. My primary responsibilities on this project are going to be community engagement, objectives, and policies and implementation.
I'm Drew Bronner. I'm a planner with Kimley Horn, and my background is in transportation planning, both thoroughfare planning and then also multimodal solutions. And I'll also be part of this project with the scenario planning analysis.
Amy Avery, also Kimley Horn. I'm an engineer by trade. Traffic engineering is my specialty. And I've done a lot of work with local communities in the San Antonio metro area. I'm based out of our San Antonio office. For strategies dealing with growth, so impact fees, rough proportionality, TIA ordinances, things of that nature.
So we're going to go into the formal presentation. Again, thank you very much for letting us come and visit with you today. We talked a little bit about some of the individuals that are going to be key task leaders through the process. But the group of people that we've brought together, we just wanted to emphasize, we're a multidisciplinary team. As Bill said, he's an economist. I've got a design background. Drew's a pure planner. But each of us wear different hats through the process. We have a lot of experience in planning and implementation. We're going to keep coming back to that and emphasizing that. While it's important that we're planners and know how to work with the community to develop the community's vision and put that plan and implementation together, we think it's equally important that many of us have worked through the implementation process and getting projects designed and built. We've seen that side of things, and it helps us as we're planning things to be able to be on the right path to make sure that at the end of the day, what you're after is not just a plan, but all the great things that will come out of the plan that were envisioned by the community and having that community built in the future. And we've got long-term working relationships. So Bill's partner Ann and I worked back in 1996 on a plan in Colorado for the E470 corridor. And we've been working with Ann and Bill ever since. Monica was our client. We worked with her for years as our client. And when she hung out her shingle, we were probably one of the first firms to approach her and said, we really want to team with you because we had such a good working relationship. So we really get what each of us bring to the process and respect that, work together well as a team in the community. We had provided the org chart in our qualifications package. The key thing related to the org chart we wanted to share with you is we have task leaders that are a part of the process at every step. So in other words, we don't just have a couple of people that are looking at data collection and then a different set of people that are developing the components and somebody else on implementation. Each of our team members have a role in each of those processes along the way. So we continue to work as a team, each of us coming forward or fading back on the team as necessary to move things forward. And then finally, community engagement. The important thing about that is it starts at the beginning of the project and goes all the way through to the end. We develop things in a way that we've set processes in place, groups in place that can continue on beyond the life of the planning study. So that experience, there were several projects that we included in the overall qualifications package. Those are in italics: Frisco Comprehensive Plan, One McKinney 2040 Plan, Bulverde Land Use and Zoning Map, Realize Rowlett 2020. One of the key things you'll see on a lot of these is they're branded. The projects were branded as Realize Rowlett 2020 or One McKinney, One Vision. There's a reason for that, because we really wanted the community to understand what that project was about and buy into that going forward. But as you can see, there's significant experience beyond the projects that we shared with you in the qualifications. We want to talk a little bit about our unique project approach, essentially facilitating the realization of your community's vision. So the point of beginning is really your city council goals, vision, and mission statement. So I'm not going to go into detail in that. I know that you spent a lot of time working through the details of that, but the thing we want to emphasize is that everything we see and what you've put out there is something that is very relevant to this comprehensive plan. And I know you developed a lot of that knowing that you would be moving forward with this process, but we're going to point out a few places through this presentation today that's aligning with that, with those goals. So the project approach, it's a real simple diagram, but it's really critical to our philosophy and how we move forward. We look at the physical opportunities in the community. Obvious things here: you have a great downtown, you've got a beautiful river that comes through the community. Those are unique things that not every community has. We look at the market potential with Bill to say, what is the market wanting to deliver in your community today, the real estate market, but what are other things that they should be delivering, but maybe they're not because they need to have more information about what your community's about. And then finally, community aspirations. And 100% of our philosophy is focused on that the vision needs to be at the nexus of those three things. We've really got to focus in on making sure the community is on board, that it's their vision. And if you don't have that, you could have all the market potential in the world and all the physical opportunities, but those projects won't become a reality because it's not something the community wants to see here. The key is we're going to be partnering with you throughout this process and then the implementation process. So one of the other key things is we really look at your community as we want to augment your distinctive assets. So every community has a different set of assets. They may be historic, they may be cultural, it may be physical assets. So we really go in and start to look at what those things are. And instead of some communities that just say, well, here's an intersection, there ought to be retail on the corner, and develop a land use plan saying, what are the land uses we want? We really start with your assets and say, how do we build community and development around each of those assets? Some of the ones that we've identified already are the downtown Kerrville, the municipal airport, Schreiner University. You've got a couple of medical facilities. One of the things we see in medical facilities is, why can't you have multiple residential types to support not only doctors but pink-collar workers that are working in those facilities, as well as the restaurants and all of those things that could be supported by people that are right there. It starts to cut down on commuter trips. You really start to create these enclaves based on each of these assets. The key to this is they're not then competing with each other because you're gearing them around a strategic asset that you have in place. So Monica is going to talk to you a little bit more about the community aspirations.
Well, it was very clear in the RFQ and in your current set of goals that you want your community to be a part of this process, a very active part of this process. So our plan is to design a public engagement plan that is customized to your situation and includes all sorts of opportunities and combines a variety of approaches to gathering public input, ongoing general involvement, targeted input, and interactive events, and we will talk about each of those in just a second. But the bottom line is that when this is all over, this needs to be your community's plan, not the plan that the consultants dreamed up. So let's talk about ongoing general involvement. We want to provide multiple opportunities for the community to take part in this process at their convenience. Some people have more limited time than others, so we want to give them a number of different ways to be involved. And as I said, our target group here is just anybody and everybody. There are multiple techniques that we can use. We can help you with content for a website. And when you see these, some of these references in parentheses, it's because I'm pulling that from your RFQ. For example, you thought you'd like to have your website up and running by October. And the graphic on the left is an example of website content that was developed for the McKinney Plan. So website, if you want a Facebook page, we can help you put one of those together. Your RFQ didn't mention online surveys, but they can get a lot of input in a very short amount of time and a whole lot of participation that way as well. You spoke about newsletters and pop-up town halls and displays, which would be appropriate for events like your Arts and Crafts Fair, the music festival, and your triathlon.
Well, the Real Life Our Life 2020 Planning Initiative started back in December of 2010 as a way to update the city's comprehensive plan.
We just wanted to let you know that we do have the ability also to help you put together videos that could be accessible, you know, at various points throughout the process, early, middle, afterwards, but we do have the capabilities of doing that. Okay, second aspect is targeted community input, and that's where we sit down with people who may have some special insight or some special relationship or a unique knowledge related to the community. And that could be, and I neglected to mention your Comprehensive Plan Strategic Committee, but clearly that is a targeted group for us because they're going to be coming from all different perspectives. But you know, we might involve the Chamber of Commerce, neighborhood leaders, you have a downtown or a Main Street association, institutional leaders like from religious institutions, the university, just a number of entities that may have some very unique input that we could use as we move forward. These tend to take place in small group meetings. Sometimes we do it with individuals, but the graphic on the left shows one that we did recently in Bulverde. Okay, finally, the big three components include interactive events, and that's where you invite people to come and take part in activities that some might actually call fun, where they have the opportunity to sit down and do hands-on exercises, and they'll hear typically a presentation. There will be boards that people can view in advance or after the presentation and make comments on. Table exercises, even sometimes for kids, we'll have a table where they can sit down and give us some input. So there's a number of ways that we can get feedback from people, and typically this is going to be in the form of a community open house or maybe a neighborhood open house.
That would be me. As I said earlier, you know, our role on the team is going to be to really provide the market and economic reality to the planning process. And a couple of points that I would make here is, one, especially in smaller communities that are on the edge of metropolitan areas or just outside of metropolitan areas, we know that at some point growth is coming. You know, driving up Interstate 10 from San Antonio, you can kind of see development marching toward your community and other communities to the south of you. And so there's a couple of ways or strategies to accommodate that growth. One, you can just react to it when it comes, or two, you can really try to get out ahead of it, understand it, plan for it, and then hopefully guide that development growth the way that you want to see it, the way that your community really wants to see it. And that's why the market analysis is so important, that we can quantify for you what that demand is for different kinds of real estate product types, different kinds of land use types, and that then becomes almost, it's almost like providing the parameters for how growth could occur. Once we've done that, then we can think about where best the community would like to see those different uses go. We call it readying the environment for investment, because if you think about a comprehensive planning process, the ultimate target is not only your community at large, but the private sector that's going to come in and implement the projects that you want them to, the kinds of products that you want, the kinds of land uses that you want. So at some point, I think Mark had on a slide earlier, we want to tell the right story to that private sector audience through the comprehensive plan. Some of the analysis tools that we use, and I won't go into great detail here, but what we're really trying to do is understand not only the demographics and psychographics of your community, and psychographics is just a way to kind of put a face on the numbers of demographics. We want to understand those indicators, not only for the people who live in your city, but the people around you. And you know, we tend to look at a fairly large regional area around the city to think about, you know, what kinds of demographic trends are happening in those areas. Are those potential demographic groups that would be attracted to projects within the city? And again, what we're really trying to do with this information is translate those demographic and economic and psychographic trends into demand for certain types of land uses and real estate product types. We know, you know, from looking at some of the demographics that we pulled for the city of Kerrville, you've got, you know, your age, your population, 65 and older is about 3 times the average for most Texas communities. So that's, you know, that right away tells us, you know, that this is an attractive place for retirees, and that has all kinds of implications for the type of housing those people want, the type of retail they want. We're also seeing some the influx of younger families, which, you know, I can tell you nationally as a trend, there's a trend from both directions, from retirees and from younger families, that they want to live closer together. You know, the grandparents want to be close to grandkids, and younger families want that connection to that older generation. So again, at both ends of the age scale, or the age cohort scale, you've got opportunities there to serve both of those communities with very different, you know, housing product types, very different retail products, very different employment opportunities. So again, that's just one thing that we want to dig into to see, you know, who are these people, who are the people that live here today, who are the people that work here today, and maybe more importantly, who are the people that will potentially live in your community 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Again, market data, we can get pretty detailed about what their desires are, you know, what the kinds of things that they look for in a community. As far as the market analysis itself goes, as I said earlier, we really look at an area well beyond the city. Your Economic Development Corporation has done a really good labor shed analysis to show, you know, the broad area that job potential is coming from. So that's an area that we want to look at in terms of demographics to see, you know, are there people who live in that outside area that might be, you know, attracted to places within Kerrville that could live here and work here, which, you know, I think as a community, everybody wants that. That market share, again, we look at that larger regional trade area and then we begin to quantify. And again, this is over a 20-year period. So we'll look at 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years out, and quantify what the potential market is for all those different land use types within that larger trade area. Back to Mark.
We're kind of out of time on the presentation, so
Okay.
if you want to wrap up that.
Yeah, so Monica, I'm going to go through very quickly the next few slides. So we can take that information and develop it to look at alternative scenarios to identify the ramifications of each of the scenarios and utilize that in public meetings to help the decision-making process. From the fiscal analysis standpoint, we come back and look at various scenarios. What we did in Frisco and in Bulverde is we actually came forward with looking at the surplus or deficit from a fiscal standpoint of the community based on the future land use plan. It's critically important to know where your community will end up under the plan. Implementation, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this, but very quickly, we develop a detailed implementation matrix. We go through, we identify things from the very beginning that might be implementation items. It's not just about what the city is going to implement, but what other partners might be out there to implement things, and timing as well as costs related to implementation. We go through that in quite a bit of detail on the matrix. That becomes a path forward for city staff to use to be able to look at every year with council to identify, have we achieved the things that we want to achieve over this year related to implementation? That merges into your CIP program. We can go a step further and get into form-based codes and other types of mechanisms. Downtown Rowlett, we actually then went a step further with a catalyst development plan, looking at some infrastructure projects, development sites that could be developed in partnership with private development and the city, and moving that process forward. In downtown Richardson, we actually looked at multiple projects related to roadways, did detailed cost estimates for every one of those projects, and then came up with phasing and top priorities for city management and the city council to determine how to move implementation of downtown forward. So we're not going to leave at the end of the planning process. We have the ability to stay right there with you to continue through these additional processes to move the project forward. I apologize we went over these last two slides. We're going to save for kind of wrapping things up, but at this point we'd like to open things to questions.
Okay, Bill, first of all, are you out of Denver?
Yes.
Oh, always? Okay.
Yes.
All right, what we'll do now
Yes.
is have a series of questions. I'm sorry, I saw it in the book, I just wanted to know. From the council members, and then we'll wrap up with questions by staff.
Thank you.
So I will begin. What part of your team's experience with a comprehensive planning effort, if any, would you say goes beyond land use and transportation planning?
Well, we in most of the comprehensive plans that we develop, for instance, the Frisco Comprehensive Plan, the McKinney Comprehensive Plan, McKinney had a component that's focused in on their downtown area and even further strengthening that area. They both look at public infrastructure beyond mobility, transportation. Most of our comprehensive plans look at water, wastewater. Now, some communities, what we'll find is they've recently updated a water and wastewater plan. So what we'll do is take guiding principles from the comp plan and develop those in alignment with our understanding of those water and wastewater plans, and then we start to tie them back together with, okay, based on the land use direction and some of the other direction we've heard in the community, it might be worthwhile looking at some aspects of those plans so we can make recommendations that way. On the other hand, we've also come in and done full-blown updates to water and wastewater master plans, resiliency plans for communities, whether it's a flooding issue or tornadoes or hurricanes. We've developed those types of things. Public health and safety, Monica's developed a couple of those for us related to not only public safety facilities, but also from a planning standpoint, creating safe environments when you design. There are design principles you can incorporate, as well as public health, having good access to healthy foods. So, Monica, are there any that I've missed? Certainly, economic development. So, the fiscal, yes.
No, that's fine. That answers the question.
Okay.
Mr. Vogel?
Yes, a city of any size has differing viewpoints on both sides of the pro-growth versus non-growth argument. Describe an instance where you have faced the question squarely.
So in Rowlett, Texas, and we're going to reference that a couple of times, and the only reason I'm saying that is because when we started working in Rowlett, they were about 18,000 people. They're about 30 square miles. They had a lot of interesting, natural features that they could take advantage. There were some parallels, but in Rowlett, there was a lot of argument about. There was a strong desire with many in the community to remain forever a bedroom community, and so as we started talking to the community about what that meant, and especially with City Council. Bill got involved, Bill and Ann almost immediately, and started looking at the fiscal ramifications of their current plan and just remaining a bedroom community. Not to say that's wrong. If the community desired that, then you can start to look at tax structure and all of those things to make it happen. But as we went through the process and really opened the engagements to multiple people in the community, we got people around tables. So for instance, in a community workshop, we never set a table with this homeowners association together at this table and this special interest group at this table. We mix things up between every table with a representative from multiple groups and ask them to form a consensus on what their vision is. And it's really great because what it's doing in a microcosm is teeing up those discussions so that everybody's hearing everybody else's perspective. And ultimately what we came out with was a unified plan, a consensus plan, and an understanding that there did need to be growth beyond residential in specific areas, some higher density residential to support the fiscal balance. I hope that answers your question.
Mr. Fruity?
This will be a 20 to 30 year plan, but in what ways will you assist us to ensure that this comprehensive plan will remain relevant for 30 years?
So that's a real interesting question. There's a couple of aspects of that. The number one thing is it needs to be the community's plan and not the consultant's plan. So that's a starting point for relevance up front and for the early years. Secondly, the implementation strategies that we'll develop in the matrix will suggest that you consistently be checking in on the items that have been accomplished and that you continue to gauge the community's support for the direction the plan's going. We do recommend that about every 5 years, if things are growing fairly slowly, then maybe it could take longer, but typically about every 5 years that you look and consider going back out to the community, discussing relevance, say this was the vision, these things have been accomplished, are there new things, and you can very quickly understand if things have changed in a way that the community wants to go a different direction, you can do that. By no means would we encourage, if the community's gone a different direction, that you just stick with that existing plan. It's got to be living and breathing every year.
Okay. Ms. Summerlin?
How can you assist us in ensuring that Kerrville keeps its unique quality as it grows?
So that's a great question, and we touched on it some in the presentation. The way we approach this is by looking at strategic assets. And when we talk about assets, we don't just mean a cool downtown area or the river, the natural systems that you have here, but there may be unique cultural things. There are certainly some unique historic things. So we look at all of those things to really try to base a plan on expressing those types of things. Now, we listed a few of them in our presentation, things that are obvious to a firm that's coming in to talk to you. But the way we really make sure that it's relevant related to those things is to get in discussions with your key stakeholders, with the community representatives. That is what the entire front process is based on, is gathering that type of information and then coming back and saying, this is what we've heard. And we do have Ryan on the team who is going to be there to help with branding. And so while we may not go into detail of developing logos for something, certainly we talk about real estate product, we talk about land uses, we hear from the community so much of the types of places they want here, and Ryan can help us express that in the comp plan through, how do we express the brand of those unique things that, again, you want to make sure you have places in Kerrville that are really augmented. They're already there. How do you augment that, and how do you make sure that you carry on that expression to maximize the value to the community?
Okay, Mr. Ferguson?
Have you identified or made a reasonable assumption for an infrastructure or resource challenge that we're facing that may be particularly concerning to you? And what will be your first steps in working on this issue?
So the one thing that really popped out related to council goals was water supply. And so we're assuming when something reaches that level, now certainly there are several things that the city can do, but you are somewhat dependent on other resources around the state and the county for water supply. But certainly we can look at supply systems. I think the question was more related to availability of water in the area. What we did in Frisco is we got into a lot of detailed discussions about water, and the number one question that came up related to infrastructure and natural resources at the beginning of that project, especially with the explosive growth they've had, is will there be enough water in Frisco? And the discussion was maybe, and there will be enough water if we continue down the path of bringing things online to support the future we want. But at the same time, we don't have enough water to waste. So much of the comp plan then became focused through not just that chapter, but through every chapter on how do you take the most advantage of those resources and implement some things in the community. Because so much of what a community can do is looking at ways to reuse water, not waste water, those types of things that are appropriate for a comp plan level.
Thank you.
Yeah, transportation is always an issue with growth, and so certainly Drew and Jeff and Amy will be looking on that, and it's the multiple modes of transportation available.
Okay. Describe an experience that your team has had involving two seemingly opposing sides of a local issue, and how did you facilitate and stay alive during that?
I can keep going, but I want to make sure that it's not just me answering these questions. Very recently, and I'm not sure we included this project in the materials, and it was not a comprehensive plan, but it was certainly a highly emotional project. It was there's a place in Dallas called Preston Center. It's one of the oldest shopping centers in the city. It was a very affluent area. I forgot Mark was in the room. Maybe I better stop. So we were a part of a process that the city of Dallas worked very closely with COG. I was the project manager on that project. There were property owners in Preston Center who were scared to death to have any change because they had done the same thing their families had done it for 50 years. They wanted to make sure they could do it as long as they were alive and didn't want anything to mess that up. There are tons of development pressure to have much higher density and intensity development. It's probably I'm sure it's the most expensive real estate in Dallas for development. There were players that were not in agreement, like former Mayor Laura Miller versus Mark Cuban, who was buying up multiple large residential properties, tearing down the buildings because he wanted to develop it as commercial development. So what we did was very openly went through a process working with the community. There was an advisory committee put together that had representatives from the neighborhood, representatives from the development community, and representatives from the Preston Center business owner, the property owners, and essentially went through a series of discussions and meetings teeing up key aspects that essentially in a public forum we negotiated with the community as to what things would be acceptable and what things would not be acceptable in Preston Center going forward. The good thing is there was a vision that came out of it to create a very positive future environment for the area, but it had some key triggers for those that weren't comfortable with that environment of issues that they had being taken care of before you could move each step of the way down that path.
Mr. Vogel?
The Guadalupe River is one of our greatest assets. Can you describe how you might address it in a comprehensive plan?
So, you know, it's very interesting. Our observation has been that while the Guadalupe River is a great asset from a natural standpoint, I think going back in time is so many times the case. We worked on, I guess another war wound I have from years ago was working on a comprehensive land use plan for the Trinity River corridor in Dallas. And through that process, we looked at what kinds of development and redevelopment could happen along that corridor. What we saw up and down the corridor is every business that came in throughout history turned its back on the river. You know, it's interesting, early history, businesses will utilize the river and take advantage of it, but as development went on, there were a lot of things that were done to turn backs to the river. So it really seems like one of the key things related to the river, you've really gone down a great path of open space and parks, but how does development really take advantage in key nodes along those areas? You don't want to spoil the natural beauty, but there are, I'm sure, some great places where development could occur that are development types that are totally integrated with the river. That was the idea behind the Trinity River Corridor project in Dallas. And again, in Rowlett, I mentioned that it had quite a bit of natural area. It essentially had several miles of shoreline along Lake Ray Hubbard. And when we started talking to them on the comp plan the first time, they said, what do? We've got this big lake out here that's dividing our community. And immediately we turned the question back on the community and said, what should we do? Because you have a great lake that's a great amenity right in the middle of your community. So everything they had done to date was turned residential development back into the lake. And what we did is came up with a plan that focused parkside roads with residential across the street, special types of development with outdoor dining on the lake, even water ferries and those types of things connecting surrounding communities. And at the end of the day, the community was extremely excited about turning something they saw as a liability into an asset.
Mr. Brody?
There are many theories regarding the best approach to thoroughfare and land use planning. You described some of the approaches that you might believe would fit best for Kerrville.
Yep. So the way that the transportation planning practice has kind of evolved over the years has gone from one where capacity planning for new growth was kind of the one and only approach that we took. Make sure we have the number of lanes that we need to serve all growing areas of the city, but you're kind of ignoring some of the established parts of a community and some of the unique assets. So we take what's called a context-sensitive approach to thoroughfare planning. Make sure that we're providing that capacity in growing areas and serving those potentially new residential and commercial areas. But when it comes to, say, an established downtown with unique assets, you can adapt the design of your existing street infrastructure to serve the users that you already have in place, whether it's kind of a walkable core or maybe kind of a natural area with a lot of bike activity. We can adapt parts of streets, parts of your thoroughfare plan to meet the unique needs in various parts of the city.
Ms. Summerlin?
Our topography, hills, represents both opportunities and challenges. Describe some of both as you see them at this point.
Well, certainly From the standpoint of urban design, I see the topography as being one of those unique assets to Kerrville. As a matter of fact, on my way down yesterday, I came down to drop off my son at Texas State University, and it's very clear the way they've started to respond to topography with development that may have an entry on one level and you go through an elevator in the building and you're able to exit on the other level, and the ability to get from one end of the campus to the other by utilizing ramps or different mechanisms to really create a walkable environment. I think here the things that I would look at more at a city-wide level from an urban design standpoint is that certainly you can start to develop things in a way to where this building's not necessarily going to be blocking the building that's next to it or the building that's next to that. You have the topography to where multiple levels can start to have a view of the wonderful countryside around Kerrville. The other aspects of that is, there are obviously a lot of trees out there too, so you can really start to look at the more steep areas. Oftentimes what we'll do in communities is have a slope analysis and really understand where are the areas that should be developed and where are the areas that should be preserved. Whether it's in private open space, they become a part of an extended backyard of a residence that is left natural, or through public open space that's maintained out there. On the liability side, certainly from the standpoint of designing roads, as Drew and the team are looking at the thoroughfare plan, we need to be extremely cognizant of what the slopes are. My take is in a lot of those areas you're not going to have straight roads, you're going to have curvilinear roads. And so I think from the standpoint of a comprehensive plan, we need to be looking at a thoroughfare plan in a way that has adaptability, that says in some cases it may be this is the general location of the road that needs to go to a higher level of design as a follow-on to understand exactly the right corridor that it should be within. But we've got to at least have a in-depth understanding of the basic elements that we're dealing with as we develop the thoroughfare plan. That's just one example.
Okay. Mr. Ferguson?
Your team appears to cover all the bases that would be included in the plan. Please describe your approach to collaborating with one another and in coordinating planning efforts with the city staff.
Oh, that's a great question. So as part of the approach we've taken and the process we've taken, we have developed techniques that have been very successful coordinating with city staff. So there's a couple of key things. Number one, we start off the process, and I can't get to the org chart because you won't be able to hear me, but the top box just below me is the project manager when we're talking about data collection and all of those things. Oftentimes we call that the state of the city. And the reason we do that is there's a wealth of information at City Hall, at TxDOT and the county related to existing facilities, planned facilities. We very quickly pull all of that information together from GIS databases, all of those things. And then one of the first things we do is set up what we call a State of the City meeting with city staff, with representatives from multiple departments, so that we can really, as a team, drill down into the thoroughfare plans, the CIP program, development plans in place, zoning, all of those things. We start off with, here's our understanding, what are we missing? Because otherwise we could be spending a whole lot of time and money going down rabbit holes with things that really aren't important because we were just handed a report and we took something from it we shouldn't have. So this is really an all-day session with breakout meetings with multiple departments to do that. The second thing we do with city staff is we highly encourage that every 2 weeks we have a Skype call, WebEx or Skype, an online call, where I develop a detailed agenda of where we are in the process, the things that we need to be working on because we're about to have stakeholder interviews, or there's going to be an open house, or we're trying to get the website, whatever it is that we're focused on at that time, and the things we will be focused on a month to a month and a half beyond that. The things that are upcoming, we get into a high level of detailed discussion to make sure the public involvement piece is coordinated, all the maps and everything are coordinated, and really generate an understanding with city staff on where we are, where we're going to be meeting deadlines. Within the team itself, and I'm sorry it's long, but within the team itself, we have multiple work sessions where we get together because, like I said, we're not just going to go develop a land use plan and develop economic development and market. We have work sessions in our office where we get together to really brainstorm together what we're hearing and what that means as we start to lay out alternatives for the plan and how that might be presented before we start sharing ideas with city staff to make sure they're valid. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to underscore, as a team member, and this is why Mark is our favorite project manager to work with. We see ourselves as a collaboration of experts. And as certain issues come up, which they always do during a comprehensive planning process, especially a long-range comprehensive planning process, we have the experts to come forward and kind of be the team leader during that particular issue, dealing with one issue or another. And I think that's, the beauty of our process from your perspective is that you'll always know that there is somebody on our team that can answer the questions, the hard questions that come up during a planning process, with no ego.
Okay.
As little as possible.
So how would you propose to maximize citizen and stakeholder participation if you were selected? In particular, you might want to touch on your Mind Mixer program. Monica didn't cover it earlier, but I don't know if it's your deal, but it was interesting to read about it here.
Well, I can talk a little bit. You want to talk about what we did in Frisco with Mind Mixer, and I can add to that?
Actually, I was not highly involved in that, but I worked more closely with
Okay.
Lowell.
So Monica has developed, typically is the one that is the mastermind behind developing the plan and the logistics for how everything's going to roll out. What I can tell you about Mind Mixer is it's an online interactive tool. Now it's called My Sidewalk, but it was called Mind Mixer before, that essentially allows you to tee up a topic, whether it is, okay, there's an asset in this area of the community, what are some things that could be developed around that asset that would have a lot of synergy with it, all the way down to we're thinking of these types of implementation strategies. Are there other strategies to achieve this goal that you've seen or would like to see us to develop further? What it does is it allows you to tee those types of things up, and it allows then participants to communicate back with ideas. So it's very useful at a very high level of what are the assets we should be focused on, all the way down to looking at additional implementation measures. It's very powerful. It all comes down to where do we want to utilize it and plug it in. And also the branding is a key part of that. So we're able to do all of that stuff online.
Okay. And I'll say also that in the online surveys that I've been involved in, it's just amazing how much information you can get at a relatively low cost in a quick time period. And the nice thing about most of those programs, SurveyMonkey is the one that I used last time around, they give you a report, and so it's very quickly to get at a glance kind of how things stand. And I think it's important, two things are really important. One is the demographics of the respondents. We always like to poll on those, because if you find out that one segment of your community is over-responding to the survey relative to how much of their community, what percent they actually represent, then you've got to do something to reach out to other parts of the citizenry. And the other thing is sometimes you walk into these processes thinking that you know what's important to everybody, and you find out that you're wrong. You know, so one of the things that was really interesting to me in Richardson is we did a visual preference survey. We took photographs of existing buildings, and we said, do you think this is worth saving? Do you think this is worth saving? Do you think this is worth saving? And there was one that was very surprising. There was a cluster of buildings. You knew they were going to, you know, you knew that was going to be important. But there was this one little area where we thought, oh man, we're never going to get away with doing anything that's going to cause that to go away. Wrong. People were not that worried about it at all.
Mr. Vogel?
This planning effort will extend 2 miles beyond the city's current city limits. How would you propose we engage Kerr County stakeholders in the process?
So you want to talk about that a little,
I'm sorry,
bit? So how would you propose, it's going beyond the city limits, obviously, in the ETJ, so how would you get participation from Kerr County stakeholders?
Okay. Well, you know, I have seen a city go truly the extra mile by, and it was a small community, granted, but they went the extra mile by mailing postcards to everybody that they hoped to hear from. And I think, you know, it was pretty costly, but I think they definitely did get some people that would not have been there otherwise. And the other thing is to mail or contact or make a special effort somehow to get with businesses that may be in Kerr County but not in the city. And by that I mean not just going to the tax roll and mailing to the property owner, but going, you know, getting a list of businesses and making a special effort to reach out to them. So those are, I think, things that could maybe broaden the perspective.
And the only thing I'd add to that is oftentimes there are institutions out there too, whether it's churches or small communities that may have facilities that we can utilize some of those institutions, like a church, to do a meeting in a box and some of those types of things to generate feedback and get information back to us.
Okay. Mr. Rudy?
What do you see as Kerrville's most obvious infrastructure bottlenecks controlling our growth capacity?
So, and that's a difficult question for me. I would think that just based upon the things that we've seen, that it has to do with water supply and those types of things. But we have not done detailed studies of your infrastructure at this point. Your mobility systems, you know, obviously having been out here and around, a lot of that is driven by some TxDOT corridors and some things like that. But certainly I don't think there's anything that with good development you couldn't start to add to that framework.
What experience does your team have with economic development, and what strategies do you see as relevant for Kerrville?
Hi. Well, just about every comprehensive plan that we've worked on over the past, 25, 30 years that we've been doing this, has included an economic development component. Generally speaking, those economic development components within a comprehensive plan usually aren't detailed enough as you know, a document that your ED people can take and really kind of dig their teeth into. So oftentimes we'll do a more strategic document as a follow-on. I think what we've tried to do in the past 5 years or so, especially working with Mark's group, is to identify within the economic development component, get into a lot more detail about, Mark mentioned the portfolio of assets within your community. You know, certain areas where you might want to encourage a certain type of development that will catalyze economic activity for the entire community. So, you know, as we've developed plans with them, we really have tried to get into a lot more detail on the economic development side. I think for you all, as a community, because of your location, you already have some good economic development momentum built up. You know, you've got a pretty active tourism sector that you probably can take even more advantage of. It's the quality of life is here, so you can attract, you know, people who want to work here. So I believe it's really working with your Economic Development Corporation, your Economic Development staff people to kind of round out what your community has in terms of employment growth, employment opportunities, and ultimately it's going to be determined by how much growth comes your way and how much growth is accommodated within your community.
Why is your firm most qualified to be hired for this planning effort for Kerrville? Last question.
Is that the last question?
That's the last question.
Okay. Well, great segue, and I appreciate that. So there's a couple of things that we want to point out to you. Number one, you've met all of us in the room, and I think I'm sure that everybody has the main bases covered based upon the staff and expertise that they're bringing to the project. But the key thing I want to bring out about Kimley Horn is that so many of us that work in the planning realm with Kimley Horn also are working further downstream in final design and construction and seeing things get built. And I think it's very important that we keep in mind that so many times a plan will be developed and a consultant will come in, develop the plan, develop an implementation strategy, and hand it over and say, here's the keys to the car, good luck with that. And we don't do that. We understand developing that implementation strategy based upon what you want to see built at the end of the day, and we stay with you after that strategy to continue down the path with other types of things, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But these are just some of the types of things that get built that we participated in. I want to give just a real quick overview of Rowlett. Again, I touched on it earlier. Rowlett, when we started working out there, was about 18,000 people. Now it's 55,000. Median income, 85,000. Substantial natural amenity with many miles of shoreline from Lake Ray Hubbard. Underutilized amenity. People were just looking at it, not touching it. So essentially, the City Council was also focused on transparency and fiscal responsibility. So we worked very closely with the community to develop their vision for the future. We came up with 13 strategic investment areas in the community, each focused on a different asset. One was downtown. Another was the largest site that was remaining in the community that could accommodate large-scale lakefront development that was commercial development for restaurants and outdoor dining, those types of things. Many strategic assets. We then came forward with looking at the fiscal challenges of making those happen and really work through an implementation strategy to overcome those barriers. Next step, we developed priorities, timing, immediately rolled into a form-based code for 4 of those 13 areas. So just move any zoning restriction that was keeping that from becoming a vision out of place so that it could happen. Developer RFPs, Bill and Ann developed developer RFPs to move down the road for projects the city wanted to participate in, additional pro forma analysis, and then final engineering of improvements. This is just showing some of the things that are in construction or have been constructed, but overall, with all of the things that have been coming out since the adoption of the plan, it's about $1.5 billion in new investment dollars that are in place in the community. Now, it's not all about the dollars, obviously. We understand that you want to be in a good place fiscally based upon your comp plan, but at the end of the day, the things that are being developed are exactly the things that the community said, we want these things in our city. So that's the reason we think you should hire our team.
And if I may say, from the city's standpoint, when you've got a consultant group that completes a project like this and then you're ready to get down to the actual physical things, it's very helpful not to have to indoctrinate an engineering firm on everything that all these guys who are with Kimley Horn have just been through, so you can get off the starting block a lot quicker when you've got a firm that's got all those capabilities in-house.
Okay.
We really appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
There's time if we can take it. Why not? We're here. If staff had anything, we certainly.
Thank you, Mayor. So remind me again, Mark, where you're officed?
I am officed in, well, we moved last week. I'm in the Galleria complex in Dallas, but I work all over the state.
Okay. And in terms of the steering committee or advisory committees that you've worked with on these projects, what size have those been?
They've varied because each community has a different approach to getting people involved. We've had some advisory committees as small as 12, 14 people. We've had other communities where there were multiple representatives from multiple stakeholders, council, P&Z involved. Frisco, I think we had about 30 people on the advisory committee and were able to work with them. At that point, you're really starting to break things down into subgroups. There are key things. We structure the agenda for those to be able to make a lot of progress and make sure the committee is weighing in on the things that are important for them to weigh in on.
And then on the implementation plan, how detailed does that get? I've seen two different theories around that, but what's your approach on the implementation plan?
Our approach is to get into a high level of detail and not just go in and say, here's the 40 things that ought to be done. We try to structure it in a way that, for instance, in some communities, they prefer to do it around topics because of the way they're structured as a staff. So they may say, what are all of the mobility things that need to be implemented? What are the development things? What are the economic things? In other communities, they say, we really want to focus in on these strategic assets. And so we will develop a high-level, detailed implementation plan that's broken out into each asset. And in doing that, here's what you need to do from an economic standpoint, mobility standpoint, zoning, land use standpoint. We typically look at timeline. So if it's something that can be a catalytic change or something that's just such low-hanging fruit that you could do it very easily and it can make a good difference, we typically set the timeline up. We typically say things less than 6 months are immediate. Again, we work with the community to say, what's your timeline that you like to see drive things? 6 months to 18 months, maybe up to 2 years, we'll say these are the priority items, and then you get into midterm and long-term items that are things that need to happen, but you want to make sure these other things happen first. We look at order of magnitude dollars. So this item is high priority and it's $1 sign, which means that it's very inexpensive. Sometimes you can do it working closely with council to change a policy. In other cases, it's something that's a high dollar item and you need to generate other things to happen to generate development and tax base to be able to then move to that next level. So, and then finally, levels of responsibility. Everything is not on the shoulders of the city. There are partners we will identify through this process. They're already working in the community. So we hope to strengthen those partnerships in this process and then have them take on aspects of this to further the vision of the community as it moves forward.
How long did the McKinney process take?
So the McKinney process was planned to be about a 14-month process. And it is still going on. And when I say it's going on, it is on hold. The reason for that is we went through a process in McKinney and we were working towards adoption of the plan on schedule last fall. And at that time, there were some changes in the management there. And there had essentially been a direction that there was an issue in the community related to future of the U.S. Highway 380 corridor. So through that process, the city manager said, we want staff to develop some alternatives and go out and have an outreach consultant. We'd like you to go on hold for a little while. Let us do that. We'll get some outreach. We'll quickly get direction, and then we want to show that on the future plan, which was a different direction than we had been going for the previous 9 months. At that point, the community was skeptical of a 380 bypass. And so through that process, TxDOT has now stepped in and said, we're going to do a corridor study for 380, have public meetings, and come up with a preferred alternative So that process is taking place by early next year. It should be complete, and at that point, we will finish writing the report and have the final public input sessions. In the meantime, our concern was, with all due respect, with these things happening, we had so much momentum. The community was excited. We're going to be teeing up some meetings and activities in the next couple of months to continue generating that excitement related to the majority of the plan while TxDOT does their work.
And then finally, just real quickly, how long did the Frisco plan take?
The Frisco plan was complete and recommended for adoption by the P&Z within about 12 months. And then following that, council delayed action on the plan until that following summer. But it was substantially complete until that time.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I had one question that came to mind, and sorry to keep you, but we may as well ask you while you're here. You're obviously all at another kind of distant location from us. Did you have plans to utilize any local talent or for a point of contact other than staff, or is it using information from staff is your strategy?
You want to start?
Yeah. I realized earlier that I was a lot shorter and nowhere near this thing. I'm standing on tippy toes. So I think one of the interesting things about the way Mark and group kind of run these planning processes is, though the brain trust of them is primarily in the Dallas metro area, they do always partner with local staff. And so I'm here in our San Antonio office. There are other names in the different technical disciplines, water, wastewater, that are in our San Antonio office. And the way they always do that, it does provide an easier access. We can get out here faster, but we're also more in tune with the area. So I know that up until last Monday, we were just this close to not being able to water our lawns for like 2 months. And so we understand a lot of the local challenges, and we're facing those as well in our own neighborhoods and communities. And we also do the unique part about pairing up the planning aspect with the engineering aspect. What I really like there is if something's just totally crazy, if we're never gonna make the grade work, we can never design a road, I don't want Mark to draw that line on a map, because that's just gonna cause heartburn down the road. And the same thing goes if we can't get sewer to a location, that's probably not the best place to try to catalyze investment if the sewer's 20 years down the road. So just kind of putting that, I don't want to say wet blanket because that sounds negative, but just kind of interjecting kind of a little more of that strategic, that's wonderful, but this catalyst, maybe this is the catalyst we want to go first because it's ready and it's got the roads and the sewer. So I think that it's a unique partnership and a great way to utilize the local folks while still getting the larger statewide and national perspective that comes from bringing in planning expertise from outside.
And to go even more local, to your question, there is a local partner that we've worked with quite a bit in Kerrville in the past. Early on, we were intending to partner with him on this, and when the time of the RFP came, he said that he wasn't in a position to participate in pursuing the project. We would love to have him as a part of the project, a local engineer who's worked for the city quite a bit, and if that was something very important, we would be happy to go back to him, and again, I think we might be able to convince him to be part of the team. He just wasn't in a position to be able to move forward with pursuing the project.
Okay.
Do we have a copy of the slides?
It's actually on your, it's on the computer here.
On the, okay.
We get your copy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like PowerPoints.
Or just send me the file.
The first one's here.
Sure.
And the RFQ.
Yes. Okay. Any other questions or comments? I appreciate it so much.
Thank you very much.
Coming here today. We enjoyed the presentation, and there may be follow-up questions online that I'm sure you'll answer for us if we get to that point later on. So have a safe trip home, and again, thank you all for coming.
Okay. Thank you very much. We enjoyed it.
And we will dismiss at 4:30.
Don't